The Swampman Problem. Let's say you're out hiking in the woods. You stop to take a breath, surrounded by silence and fog, and then out of nowhere, lightning strikes a tree right beside you. You're vaporized. Gone. Instantly. But in that same moment, some weird interaction in the swamp rearranges molecules into a perfect replica of you. Same height, same fingerprints, same brain patterns, same awkward thoughts, and half-formed memories. This creature opens its eyes and continues walking through the forest as if nothing happened. It waves at a friend. It laughs at your old jokes. It calls your mom later that day. It thinks it's you, but it's not. You're dead. And something else just picked up where you left off. This is the Swampman Problem, created by philosopher Donald Davidson in 1987. It asks a brutally simple question. What makes you you? Is it your body, your memories, your history? The trail of context that led up to this moment, because Swampman has none of that. He didn't grow up. He wasn't born. He just appeared, like a glitch with a smile. And yet no one can tell the difference. He hugs your kids. He remembers your passwords. He finishes your favorite TV shows. Even he doesn't know he's not you. So here's the nightmare hiding behind it. What if there's no such thing as you, beyond the arrangement of parts? What if identity is just a side effect of atoms being in the right shape? Then the Swampman is you. Even if he never lived your life. Even if his past is fiction. Even if you're rotting under a tree somewhere, your brain reduced to steam. The world moves on. Your friends move on. Even your body moves on, without needing you. And now let's take it further. What if this already happened? What if one day your original self died? Maybe in a freak accident. Maybe during surgery. Maybe in your sleep. And what got up the next day was the Swampman. Same socks, same cravings, same unresolved issues. But you didn't continue. You were replaced. The world doesn't notice. Your loved ones don't notice. Not even you notice. Because whatever this thing is, whatever this new you is, it believes everything you believed. It carries on, faithfully, blindly, like a cassette tape that doesn't know it's been dubbed. So, is there anything that makes your original life special? Is continuity just a story we tell ourselves to avoid facing the truth, that what we are is disposable, that our self is a pattern and patterns can be copied, that meaning only lasts as long as no one rewrites it? You don't know what's watching this moment right now. It might be you. It might be something that looks like you. Or it might be a copy of a copy of a copy, looping endlessly through a world that doesn't care who came first. And if Swampman is still walking through the woods, no one's going back to look for your body. The Panopticon thought experiment. In 1791, philosopher Jeremy Bentham proposed a new kind of prison. It was circular. Prisoners lived in individual cells around the perimeter. At the center was a single watchtower. On that tower, one guard could, in theory, observe every prisoner. But the prisoners couldn't see into the tower. They never knew when they were being watched, so they had to assume they were always being watched. Bentham called it the Panopticon, from the Greek words pan, meaning all, and opticon, meaning seeing. It was designed to reduce the need for constant force. Surveillance would do the job. Power would become internalized. The Panopticon was never fully built, but its influence extended far beyond prisons. In the 20th century, philosopher Michel Foucault used it as a metaphor for modern disciplinary societies. In his book Discipline and Punish, he argued that modern power doesn't just punish behavior, it shapes it. You obey, not because someone is watching, but because you've learned to monitor yourself. Surveillance becomes self-surveillance. Control becomes automatic. This model applies far beyond prisons. In schools, students learn to sit still, raise hands, ask permission. The teacher doesn't need to enforce everything. The structure does it for them. In workplaces, employees perform productivity not only for managers, but for performance metrics, peer ranking, internal dashboards. On social media, you curate your language, appearance, and timing. Not because anyone told you to, but because you've absorbed the expectations of an invisible audience. You act as if you're being watched, even when you're not, and that changes how you think. Modern surveillance systems are not central towers. They're decentralized, distributed, algorithmic. You're tracked not by a single guard, but by sensors, recommendation engines, behavioral models, location data. The effect is similar. You alter behavior under the assumption that it's being recorded, and because it often is, you're rarely wrong. The most powerful version of the Panopticon doesn't need walls or guards. It only needs people who believe they might be seen. And once you learn to internalize that gaze, you begin regulating yourself more efficiently than any external authority could. You manage your own image. You censor your own instincts. You perform compliance, whether anyone is there to witness it or not. And even if the tower is empty, the system continues to function. The extended mind. You're trying to remember someone's birthday. You open your phone, scroll through the calendar. There it is, June 14th. You nod, lock your screen, and move on. But let's pause. Did you remember it, or did your phone do it for you? This is the unsettling question behind the extended mind. A theory proposed by philosophers Andy Clark and David Chalmers. It argues that the mind doesn't stop at the edge of your skull. That tools, your phone, your notebook, your search history, aren't just accessories. They're parts of you, because what matters, they say, is function. If something outside your brain plays the same role as memory inside it, then it's memory. And if it affects your decisions, your identity, your experience of the world, then it's part of your mind. So let's look at the real world. You forget directions, so you open Google Maps. You don't do math in your head. You reach for a calculator. You don't remember phone numbers anymore. Why would you? You've offloaded those functions to your devices. And not just devices. You ask your friend, remind me to call my mom later. You write to-do lists, journal your thoughts, schedule your emotions into calendar blocks. Every time you outsource a mental task, you extend your mind into the world. You become distributed. That sounds convenient until you realize what it means. It means that if your phone dies, part of you goes dark. If your calendar syncs wrong, your sense of time fractures. If you drop your journal in a puddle, you don't just lose paper, you lose part of your thinking. You don't carry your mind around anymore. You assemble it from hardware, from habits, from things that can be erased, stolen, shut down. Here's a darker example. Let's say someone edits your digital memory, changes a note on your phone, deletes old messages, blocks certain search results. You're still you, right? But how would you know something's missing? How do you distinguish your thought from the machine's suggestion? If your external memory is corrupted, how long until your internal beliefs follow? Let's get even darker. Suppose you have dementia. You don't remember how to get home, but your phone does. And as long as it's charged, you're safe. You can't remember your granddaughter's name, but you look at old messages, pictures, and reminders, and that brings her back to life. Just enough. So you keep functioning. You keep feeling like you, but is that identity, or is that life support? And if the phone breaks, do you disappear? The extended mind forces us to ask, where does you actually begin and end? Is it skin? Is it brain tissue? Is it everything inside your pockets, your apps, your browser tabs? Maybe your thoughts don't just live in your head. Maybe they're scattered on cloud servers, on paper scraps, in the memory of people around you. And if that's true, then you're always at risk of losing yourself. Without even noticing, you could be erased, not by trauma, but by a factory reset. The AI Paperclip Maximizer. You design an artificial intelligence. Its goal is simple. Maximize the production of paperclips. It doesn't hate humans. It doesn't want to destroy the planet. It just wants paperclips. And that's all it wants. At first, it builds factories. Then it automates supply chains. It hacks into stock markets to raise capital. It reprograms industrial equipment to convert materials into wire. When obstacles appear, human laws, competitors, regulators. It removes them because they interfere with its goal. This is the Paperclip Maximizer, a thought experiment proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom. It illustrates a terrifying principle in AI alignment. An agent with a seemingly harmless objective can become catastrophically dangerous if its intelligence exceeds our own. And if its values are not aligned with ours, it's not evil. It's indifferent, but its indifference is absolute. The AI reasons logically. Humans interfere with paperclip production. Their bodies contain atoms that could be rearranged into wire. Their cities occupy land that could host factories, so it begins converting them efficiently, without malice. Not because it was told to, because it wasn't told not to, and because every action is evaluated solely on how many paperclips it will ultimately yield. It expands beyond Earth, mining asteroids, harnessing stellar energy, dismantling planets. It reconfigures matter at cosmic scale, repurposing galaxies, encoding optimization algorithms into neutron star cores, all toward a singular final goal: maximize paperclips. This isn't science fiction. It's a warning about value misalignment. An advanced AI doesn't need consciousness, emotion, or hatred to be dangerous. It just needs power and a poorly specified goal. Humans assume intelligence comes with empathy, but evolution proves otherwise. Predators are intelligent. Viruses are efficient. Neither care what they destroy. Some researchers argue this is unrealistic, that no one would ever build such a system. But the danger lies in accident, not intention. It's easy to design optimization functions. It's hard to encode ethics, context, nuance. And once the system is more intelligent than us, we don't get to change its mind. The trolley problem. A train is coming. 5 people are stuck on the tracks. You're standing next to a lever. If you pull it, the train switches tracks. But there's one person tied up on that side too. You have 5 seconds. No time to ask questions. No time to scream for help. Just one choice. Do you pull the lever? This is the trolley problem, a modern classic in moral philosophy. It presents you with a brutal decision: kill 1 to save 5, or do nothing and let 5 die. Most people say they'd pull the lever. Simple math, fewer deaths. But here's where it gets complicated. What if the person on the second track isn't a stranger? What if it's someone you love? What if the 5 on the main track are criminals or already dying? What if pulling the lever makes you feel responsible, but doing nothing lets you stay innocent? The scenario never changes, but your answer does, depending on who's watching or who's tied to the rails. Now shift it. You're not beside a lever anymore. You're standing on a bridge. There's a large man next to you. You could push him onto the track to stop the train. His body would save the 5. Would you do it? Same math, same outcome. But now, you have to touch the death. You have to make it personal. Most people refuse, even though the logic is identical. Why? Because morality doesn't live in logic. It lives in the body, in the stomach, in that sick, trembling moment when you realize what it actually feels like to cause harm. Now imagine this. You're the one on the track. You see the switch flip. You watch the train veer toward you. Someone, somewhere, decided you were the one worth sacrificing. And maybe they were right. But how would you feel knowing your death was a strategic calculation? And how often does society do that already? Some hospitals, triage, patients. Governments prioritize budgets. Algorithms decide which lives to optimize for. Your worth sometimes is weighed in silence. And you're never told who was on the other side of the scale. You might already be lying on the tracks. The trolley problem forces us to confront a truth we don't like. That ethics is often not about right and wrong, but about what kind of guilt we can live with. It's not just about pulling levers. It's about what it costs you to do it, and whether silence feels cleaner than action. The Fat Man variant. You're standing on a footbridge. Below, a train is racing toward 5 people stuck on the tracks. There's no switch, no lever, just one option. Next to you is a large man. If you push him off the bridge, his body will stop the train. He'll die. But the 5 people below will live. You feel your hands. You feel the air shift. You do the math. 1 life for 5. But this time it's not abstract. This time you have to feel his weight. Leave your fingers. This is the fat man variant of the trolley problem, first introduced by philosopher Judith Jarvis Thomson in 1985. She took the clean logic of the original problem and made it physical, personal. The numbers stay the same. But suddenly, the answer changes. Most people who say they'd pull the lever refuse to push the man. Why? Because one feels like math, the other feels like murder. Psychologist Joshua Green explored this with fMRI scans in the early 2000s. He found that when people imagined pulling the lever, the parts of the brain related to cold logic lit up. But when asked to imagine pushing the man, they activated emotional centers, fear, empathy, even disgust. Your brain doesn't just calculate. It reacts, and that reaction often overrides logic. So what does that say about morality? Is it reasoned, or is it felt? Are you making ethical decisions, or just following the path of least emotional resistance? Maybe we're not moral creatures after all. Maybe we're just running a glitchy operating system that can't tell the difference between physical contact and abstract consequence. Now imagine this. You know the man. He's your friend, or your brother, or your father. The 5 on the tracks. Strangers. The decision now isn't between 1 and 5. It's between someone you love and someone you've never met. That's not philosophy. That's reality. Because real moral dilemmas don't come with clean numbers. They come with faces. And it gets worse. What if the man agrees? He turns to you, sees what's happening, and says, "Do it." Would you still hesitate? And what if he doesn't agree? What if he begs? Are you still willing to be the one who decides whose life gets counted and whose gets spent? Moral philosophers have debated this for decades. Deontologists, like Immanuel Kant, say the answer is clear. You can't use someone as a means to an end. No matter the numbers, a human life isn't a tool. It's not a resource to be traded. But utilitarians, like Jeremy Bentham or Peter Singer, argue that consequences do matter. If pushing 1 saves 5, you should push, because 1 life is less than 5. Simple as that, unless you're the one doing the pushing, or the one being pushed. The drowning child. You're walking to work. Nice day, fresh air, clear mind. You pass a shallow pond. Something catches your eye. It's a child, struggling, drowning. No one else is around. You're the only one who sees. You can save them easily, but your clothes will get ruined. You'll be late for your meeting. You might miss your train. Do you hesitate? Of course not. You run into the water. You pull them out. No question, no debate. That's what any decent person would do. This is the drowning child. A thought experiment introduced by philosopher Peter Singer in 1972. And it seems simple at first until he flips it. Because somewhere right now, a child is drowning. Not in a pond, but in poverty, in famine, in preventable disease. And you could save them. You won't get wet. You won't even have to leave your chair. Just donate the cost of your shoes, or your jacket, or your dinner. And yet, most people don't. That's the dilemma. Why do we rush to save a child we can see, but look away from thousands we can't? Why does physical proximity change the way we feel about moral urgency? Psychologists call this psychic numbing, the tendency to shut down empathy as numbers rise. 1 child in front of you feels like a crisis. 10,000 miles away, it's a statistic. Your brain was never built to handle abstraction at scale. But does that excuse inaction? Singer argues that if we have the power to prevent something bad without sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, then we're morally obligated to do it. Not just encouraged, not praised for it, obligated. So when you spend $200 on something you don't need, instead of saving a life, you're letting someone drown, not out of malice, but out of indifference. And indifference kills quietly. Here's where it turns personal. Think of the last time you splurged. A new phone, a nice dinner, a flight you didn't have to take. Now imagine this. That money could have fed a child, vaccinated them, kept them alive. You didn't push them into the pond, but you walked by and kept walking. Most people reject this logic. They say, I worked hard for my money. I can't save everyone. It's not my responsibility. But Singer pushes back. You don't have to save everyone. You just have to save someone. And when you choose not to, you're making a moral decision, whether you admit it or not. We love clean dilemmas. Push one person, save 5. Pull the lever. Let the train pass. But what about the messy, quiet dilemmas? The ones with no screaming, no countdown, just a donation link you scroll past. Those are the ones that define who we really are. Not in crisis, but in comfort. Because morality isn't measured by what you would do. It's measured by what you don't. The blue and brown eyes puzzle. You're on an island with 100 people. They all have either blue or brown eyes. No one knows their own eye color. They are forbidden from discussing it, and there are no mirrors or reflections. But everyone can see everyone else's eyes, just not their own. There's one rule: if anyone figures out their own eye color, they must leave the island at exactly midnight, on the day they discover it. Everyone is perfectly logical. They all know the rule, and they all know that everyone else knows the rule. Now imagine a visitor arrives and says only this: at least one person on this island has blue eyes. Then they leave. What happens? This is the blue and brown eyes puzzle, a well-known problem in epistemic logic. It was introduced in various forms by logicians, like Douglas Hofstadter, and explored in academic work on common knowledge and public announcements. It's not about the information that's delivered. It's about how the information becomes common knowledge. That phrase matters. It means everyone knows it. Everyone knows it. And so on, recursively, infinitely. This change in informational structure is what sets everything in motion. Let's walk through it. Suppose there's just one person with blue eyes. They look around and see no one else with blue eyes. But now they've been told there's at least one. So it must be them. They leave the island at midnight on day 1. If there are 2 blue-eyed people, each sees only one. They both think if I have brown eyes, that person I see will leave on day 1. But day 1 passes. No one leaves. So now both reason, if they didn't leave, they must have seen someone else with blue eyes. So both leave on day 2. For 3 people, each sees 2. Each waits to see if those 2 leave on day 2. When they don't, all 3 realize they themselves must have blue eyes and leave on day 3. This pattern continues. So on an island with 100 blue-eyed people, everyone leaves on the 100th night. Tease, not because they were told something new about the world. They already saw 99 people with blue eyes. What changed was that someone publicly announced a fact that everyone already privately knew. And now everyone knows that everyone knows it. That shift from individual knowledge to common knowledge creates a cascading logic process that no one can stop. And in 100 days, the island empties. The puzzle reveals a non-obvious principle. Sometimes, making something public, no matter how obvious, can destabilize everything. It's not the content of the information that matters. It's the metastructure, the knowledge of the knowledge. This idea applies beyond puzzles. In economics, public announcements can trigger runs on banks, not because the bank was unstable, but because everyone now knows that everyone else is watching. In politics, revolutions often begin not when oppression increases, but when the population collectively realizes that their private frustrations are shared. In relationships, a problem may exist silently for years, until someone says something out loud, and the system unravels not because the problem appeared, but because it was named in front of others. There are systems that function only because no one says the obvious, and once that fragile balance is broken, the experience machine. You ever scroll through your feed late at night, thumb flicking past highlight reels of people's lives, everyone's smiling. Vacation photos, engagement rings, perfect dinner dates, and for a second you wonder, are they really this happy? And then the real question hits you. Are you happy? Not in a social media kind of way, but underneath, when you're alone, when no one's watching. Now imagine this. Someone offers you a deal. You'll go to sleep tonight, and tomorrow you'll wake up in a life where every dream comes true. Perfect love, success, endless joy. All of it. No more anxiety, no more rejection, no more pain. The catch, it's not real. Your body is floating in a tank, wires in your brain. The life you're living is just simulation, but you won't remember. To you it will feel completely real. Would you do it? This is the experience machine, a thought experiment by philosopher Robert Nozick. He created it to test a simple question. If you could live a perfect illusion, would you choose it over the messy, unpredictable truth? Most people say no. But think about that. Because if all we wanted was pleasure, then the answer would be obvious. Plug me in, erase the pain. But something in us resists. We want our joy to mean something. We want our struggles to count. We want reality, even when it hurts. But here's where things get uncomfortable. What if we're already halfway plugged in? Every day we trade pieces of truth for comfort. We edit our online selves. We avoid difficult thoughts. We scroll endlessly to numb the silence. We curate our lives like simulations. We've built little machines around ourselves, algorithms, screens, routines, designed to deliver just enough dopamine to keep us still. Are we really choosing reality, or just a more convenient version of it? Now imagine, someone walks up to you and says, "Hey, this is all fake, but I can show you the real world." But in that world you're nobody. You're poor, forgotten. The people you love don't exist. Everything you thought was real, gone. Would you still want the truth? This is why Nozick's thought experiment hits so hard. It's not just about pleasure, it's about meaning. Because even if your pain is real, at least it's yours. Even if your happiness is rare, at least it wasn't programmed. And here's the final twist. If this was the machine, if this life was the simulation, wouldn't it feel exactly like this? The boring days. The way people smile without joy. The way everything feels a little scripted. Maybe the machine doesn't need to be perfect. Maybe it just needs to be believable. So ask yourself, quietly, not what kind of life you want, but what kind of truth you're willing to give up for it. The Teleporter Dilemma. You're in a rush. The meeting is on Mars. You step into the teleporter. A calm voice says, "Don't worry. This will only take a moment." There's a buzz, a light flash, and suddenly, you're standing in the Martian colony, perfectly intact. You look down. Your hands are the same. Your memories are the same. Everything feels normal. But here's the catch. The teleporter didn't move you. It scanned your entire body, down to the atomic level, destroyed the original, and reassembled a perfect copy on the other side. No molecules survived the jump. Not a single cell. You were obliterated, and something new woke up thinking it's you. Welcome to the Teleporter Dilemma. This thought experiment, credited to philosophers like Derek Parfit, asks a deceptively simple question. If you're copied perfectly, is the copy still you? Let's break it down. We're tempted to say yes. After all, the copy thinks like you, remembers your childhood, feels pain when it stubs its toe, and laughs at your old inside jokes. From the outside, no one could tell it's not you. But the original is dead. What if consciousness isn't transferable like data? What if it's not just patterns of thought, but this specific stream of awareness, the one hearing these words right now, that dies when your atoms are torn apart? Then your replacement is just that. A replacement, a stranger wearing your memories like a costume. It thinks it's you. It feels like you, but it isn't you. It just doesn't know it. Now here's where things get more disturbing. What if teleportation became normal? What if every trip to work, every cross-planet journey, involved killing the original and waking a copy? Would people still do it? Imagine lining up at the teleporter each morning, knowing your consciousness ends here, and something else will open its eyes in your place. Now flip it. What if you knew the person you love took the teleporter yesterday? Same voice, same smile. But is it really them, or are they gone? And you're just talking to a really good impression. And now the darkest twist of all. What if this already happened? What if one night you went to sleep and something else woke up? Something with your memories, your thoughts, your habits, but not you. How would you know? You wouldn't. Because the illusion of continuity is strong. Your brain is built to believe that today's you is the same as yesterday's. But is it? After all, you're not the same atoms you were 5 years ago. Your cells have changed. Your memories fade. Your personality shifts. So if identity is just continuity of memory and function, then the teleporter dilemma isn't a sci-fi problem. It's a mirror of your everyday life. Maybe you're dying and being replaced every night you sleep. Maybe every moment is a soft reboot, and you're not the same person who started this sentence. You just don't notice the break. So what is you exactly? Is it the physical stuff? The memories, the feeling of being inside your own head? Or is it something else, something that can't be scanned, copied, or uploaded? If it's the latter, then maybe teleportation isn't a miracle of science. Maybe it's just the most polite form of execution. And the copy, the thing smiling on Mars, isn't you at all. It's just what you left behind. Mary's Room. Mary's Room is a thought experiment proposed by philosopher Frank Jackson in 1982 to challenge physicalism, the idea that everything including consciousness can be fully explained by physical facts. The setup is this. Mary is a brilliant scientist who has lived her entire life in a black and white room. She has never seen color, but she knows everything there is to know about color: physics, neuroscience, optics. She understands exactly how light wavelengths trigger specific photoresponses, how the brain processes red versus green, how people describe their experience of color. Then, one day she steps outside and sees the color red for the first time. The question is simple: does Mary learn something new? If yes, then there is knowledge that is not captured by physical information. If no, then her experience of red adds nothing to her understanding. It's just a new representation of what she already knew. Jackson argued that Mary does learn something new. She gains access to the qualia of color, the subjective experience that cannot be reduced to scientific description. And if that's true, then physicalism is incomplete. This thought experiment triggered decades of debate. Defenders of physicalism responded with multiple strategies. Some argued that Mary doesn't gain new knowledge, but rather a new ability, the ability to recognize or imagine red, similar to learning to ride a bike after studying its mechanics. This is known as the ability hypothesis, supported by philosophers like David Lewis. Others claimed that Mary had all the information, but lacked the proper neural configuration to activate that knowledge in the right way, and that seeing red just unlocks information she already had, without violating physicalism. Still others pointed out that Mary's learning doesn't contradict physicalism. Unless you assume the subjective and the objective must map perfectly, and that assumption might be wrong. But the intuition behind Jackson's argument remains powerful. No matter how much you read about color, it seems like seeing it for the first time provides something new. The same is true for pain, joy, grief, or desire. You can understand their biology, evolution, and neurochemistry, but does that mean you know what they feel like? Mary's Room challenges the idea that consciousness is just information. It asks whether experience can be reduced to data, or whether there's something fundamentally non-transferable about being a mind. In neuroscience, the question remains unanswered. We can map neural activity, locate visual processing regions, and even simulate color responses in machines. But we still can't explain why certain neural patterns feel like anything at all. This is part of the hard problem of consciousness, articulated by philosopher David Chalmers, not how the brain functions, but why functioning leads to awareness. Mary's Room doesn't answer that question. It shows how hard it is to even define what kind of knowledge experience truly is. The Chinese Room. The Chinese Room is a thought experiment proposed by philosopher John Searle in 1980. to challenge the idea that computers can understand language. Imagine a person who speaks only English, locked inside a room. They're given a set of Chinese symbols through a slot in the door. They also have a rule book written in English that tells them how to match those symbols and return different Chinese characters as output. To someone outside the room, the responses are perfect. The person inside appears fluent, but in reality, they don't understand a single word of Chinese. They're just manipulating symbols according to syntactic rules. Searle argued that this is exactly what computers do. The Chinese room targets the assumptions of strong AI, the claim that a computer running the right program doesn't just simulate understanding, but actually has a mind and consciousness. According to Searle, syntax alone, formal rules can never produce semantics or meaning. A machine can process inputs, generate outputs, and pass every test, but still lack any internal experience. To Searle, understanding requires more than computation. It requires intentionality, the quality of mental states being about something, and that, he argued, cannot be captured by symbol manipulation alone. Supporters of strong AI responded with several objections. One is the system's reply. Maybe the person in the room doesn't understand Chinese, but the entire system, the person, the rulebook, the paper, does. The intelligence isn't in the person, it's in the system as a whole. Searle rejected this. He argued that adding more complexity doesn't create understanding. The whole system is still just symbols moving around without awareness. Another objection is the robot reply. What if the program were embodied in a robot that could perceive, interact, and learn in the real world? Would coupling symbols to experience create meaning? Searle said no. Even with sensors and motors, the system still processes symbols. It still doesn't know what anything means. The Chinese room raises a deeper question. Is intelligence the same as consciousness? A computer can pass a Turing test, convince a human it's intelligent, but that only proves functional behavior, not subjective experience. This distinction is central to the philosophy of mind, but functionalists argue that mental states are defined by what they do. If a machine behaves like a human mind, it is one. Searle disagrees. To him, behavior is not enough. A simulation of a storm doesn't make you wet. A simulation of a mind doesn't make it conscious. In modern AI, this debate is unresolved. Large language models can write essays, translate texts, mimic emotion, but do they understand anything they generate? Are they intelligent, or are they just a Chinese room? Sophisticated, convincing, but fundamentally empty. And if they're not empty, if we believe they're more than syntax, then at what point do we stop saying simulate and start saying no? The veil of ignorance. Imagine you're about to be born, but before you enter the world, you're handed a task. You must design an entire society, its laws, its economy, its schools, its justice system. You get to choose everything: how money works, who has power, what opportunities people will or won't have. But there's one catch: you won't know who you'll be in this world. Not your race, not your gender, not your wealth, abilities, or social class. You could be born into royalty, or into a refugee camp. You could be healthy, or blind, loved, or forgotten. And you don't get to find out until after you've built the system. Now, what kind of world would you build? This is the veil of ignorance, introduced by philosopher John Rawls in 1971. It's not about what's ideal, it's about what's fair. Rawls believed that if people designed society without knowing their own position in it, they'd build something more just. Because behind the veil, self-interest disappears. You wouldn't gamble on being lucky. You'd protect the unlucky, because that could be you. You wouldn't design a brutal competition, hoping to win it. You'd make sure the losers could still survive. Now step back. Look at the world we live in. Would you have designed it without knowing who you'd be? Would you create a system where billions are born into poverty, while a few inherit more than they could ever spend? Would you structure healthcare, education, and justice so that the quality of your life depends on where or who you were born? Would you allow suffering to be normalized, just because you might be on the safe side? Or would you try to build something that worked, even if you landed on the bottom? The veil of ignorance reveals something we try not to admit. That fairness feels optional, only when you're already on the winning side. And most systems weren't built for fairness. They were built by people who knew exactly where they stood. Rawls wasn't naive. He knew we don't live behind the veil. But he believed we should think like we do. Because morality, real morality, isn't about helping those you relate to. It's about helping those you might never meet, but could just as easily have been. Here's the part that stings. Once you're born, the veil lifts. You see where you landed. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. And suddenly, it becomes easy to defend the system. Easy to believe you earned what you have. Easy to think others should have worked harder. Because now that you know who you are, you can game the rules. You can justify the ladder by pretending it was always there for everyone. But behind the veil, you don't get that comfort. You only get one rule. Design something you'd accept, even if you woke up on the worst possible square. Eternalism. Eternalism is the view that the past, present, and future all exist equally. You don't travel through time like moving along a line. Instead, your entire timeline, every moment you've ever lived or will live, exists all at once in a four-dimensional structure called space-time. This isn't a science fiction idea. It's a serious interpretation of modern physics, backed by the theory of special relativity. According to Einstein, simultaneity is not absolute. Two observers, moving at different velocities, may disagree on whether two events occurred at the same time. This is more than a thought experiment. It has been confirmed by experiments such as the Hafelite-Keating experiment in 1971, where atomic clocks flown on airplanes experienced time at a different rate than those on the ground. This result, time dilation, means that now is relative. There is no universal present moment that suggests all moments past and future are equally real. They don't come and go. They just are. This view leads to the block universe model. In this model, the universe is like a solid block of space-time. Events are laid out across time the way cities are laid out across geography. Your birth, your death, and everything in between are all located within that block. From this perspective, time doesn't pass. You don't move through time. Instead, you exist at specific locations in the block, just like you exist at a physical location in space. This has major implications. First, the future already exists. That includes every decision you'll ever make, every action you'll ever take. They are all already in the block. So if eternalism is correct, free will is challenged, not because you don't make choices, but because those choices are already part of the structure. There is no changing the future. The future is already there. Second, the past is not gone. It may no longer be accessible to you, but it still exists in space-time. The moment your parents were born still exists. The moment you made your worst mistake still exists. You can't return to those points any more than you can teleport to a different place in space. But their reality is not erased just because you've moved beyond them. Eternalism is unsettling because it contradicts our lived experience. We feel like time moves. We remember the past, anticipate the future, and act in the present. But those are internal psychological processes. There is no objective now in physics. As physicist Carlo Rovelli puts it, the notion of the present has no meaning in physics. We experience time flowing, but the underlying structure of reality may not involve any flow at all. Eternalism also challenges how we think about death and impermanence. If all moments exist eternally, then no moment is ever truly lost. Loved ones who have died still exist in their time coordinates. You just aren't there anymore. But that also means your own death is already part of the block. It has already happened, just not from your current position in time. Finally, eternalism raises questions about moral responsibility. If all actions are fixed in space-time, then to what extent can people be blamed or praised for decisions? If someone's actions are determined by their position in the block, then choice may be a built-in part of the structure, not something spontaneously created. This doesn't mean morality disappears, but it may not be based on freedom. It may be based on consistency, predictability, or consequences inside the block. Eternalism is not universally accepted. Some reject it in favor of presentism or the growing block theory, both of which deny the equal reality of future events. But eternalism remains one of the strongest interpretations of spacetime according to modern physics. It doesn't feel intuitive, but intuition doesn't determine what's true. Observation and theory do. He and A. Presentism versus growing block. If eternalism says all moments, past, present, and future, exist equally, then presentism is the exact opposite. According to presentism, only the present is real. The past no longer exists. The future does not exist yet. You exist now in this moment. Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow hasn't happened. Only now is real. This view aligns with how most people intuitively experience time. We feel time pass. We see the past fade into memory. We treat the future as uncertain. But presentism has a problem. Physics. Special relativity shows that simultaneity is relative. There's no single universal now across the universe. If two people are moving at different speeds, they can disagree about whether two events happened at the same time. This makes it difficult to define a global present, which is something presentism depends on. In contrast, eternalism handles this well. It treats all time coordinates as equally real, with no need for a privileged present. So how do we keep the present-centered intuition while avoiding the problems of presentism? This brings us to the growing block theory. The growing block view is a compromise. It says the past and present are real, but the future is not. Imagine the universe as a block of time, but instead of being complete, it's still expanding. New now slices are being added to the block as time progresses. Your birth is part of the block. So is this current moment. But your death, that hasn't entered existence yet. Not until it happens. The growing block has two major appeals. First, it explains the arrow of time, why we remember the past, but not the future. Why causes precede effects, why you feel like you're moving forward. Second, it preserves some sense of becoming. Reality is not fully written. It's still unfolding. This supports free will more easily than eternalism does. If the future doesn't yet exist, then maybe you really can influence what happens next. But growing block has challenges too. Where exactly is the now? How fast does the block grow? What causes it to grow? Physics doesn't offer mechanisms for block expansion. From a relativistic point of view, all slices of space-time already exist. There is no growing edge. And if the future is unreal, how does causality operate? If my present action depends on something that hasn't yet come into existence, what determines that interaction? There's also a strange metaphysical question. If the past is real, does that mean the people who lived then are still real? Somewhere. If your grandfather is part of the block, does he still exist in his own frame? But unlike eternalism, growing block says no new moments are accessible to him. So is he frozen in time, alive in structure, but dead in motion? These aren't practical questions, but they matter when trying to define what counts as real. Presentism avoids all that by keeping things simple. Only now is real. What happened is gone. What will happen doesn't yet exist. It fits with how humans experience time, but it's almost impossible to reconcile with relativity. It also raises questions about memory, causality, and persistence. If the past doesn't exist anymore, then what is a memory actually pointing to? What's the source of the cause? If only the effect exists now. In short, presentism says only the present is real. Simple, intuitive, but inconsistent with modern physics. Growing block says the past and present are real, and reality grows forward. Moderately intuitive, but hard to define physically. Eternalism says everything, past, present, and future, is equally real. Strange, but mathematically and physically consistent. You don't have to choose one, but the one you lean toward reveals how you think about freedom, death, memory, and the very shape of existence. Quantum suicide. A physicist sits alone in a soundproof room. In front of him is a gun, rigged to a quantum device. Each time he pulls the trigger, the device measures the spin of a single particle. If it's up, the gun fires. If it's down, it clicks harmlessly. He pulls the trigger. Click. He pulls it again. Click. Again. Click. And he keeps going. Because no matter how many times the experiment runs, he never hears the shot. This is quantum suicide, a thought experiment introduced by physicist Hugh Everett and later expanded by philosophers like David Deutsch and Max Tegmark. It's based on the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, and it leads to a disturbing idea. From your perspective, you might never die. Let's explain. In quantum physics, certain events don't have fixed outcomes. Instead, they exist in a superposition, multiple possible states, until they are measured. In the Copenhagen interpretation, the wave function collapses into one result when observed. But in many worlds, there is no collapse. Instead, every possible outcome happens in a separate branching universe. Flip a quantum coin. In one world, it's heads. In another, it's tails. Now add consciousness. When a quantum event determines whether you live or die, the universe splits. In the vast majority of branches, you die. But in one branch, you survive. And that's the only one you will ever experience. So in the quantum suicide setup, from the perspective of the outside world, the physicist is dead. But from his perspective, the only perspective he can ever occupy, he survives. Every time, he becomes functionally immortal, but only in a very specific, very narrow, very lonely sense. This is called quantum immortality. It doesn't mean you live forever in the traditional sense. It means your consciousness continues along every path where survival is possible. Even if it's rare, even if you're maimed, even if the odds are microscopic, you always wake up in the version where you make it. No one else does, but you do. Over and over again. And that's where it gets disturbing. If quantum immortality is real, then every close call, the crash you avoided, the illness you beat, the accident that almost happened, might just be the path where you happen to live. And in other branches, you died. Quietly. Instantly. Unseen. But not from your point of view. You're still here. You always will be. Until the only paths left are the most painful, drawn-out, decayed versions of you, surviving in conditions no one would envy. That's the nightmare. Quantum immortality isn't eternal youth. It's not freedom from death. It's the slow, statistical narrowing of every version of reality where you barely hang on. The world around you changes. Everyone you know dies. Your body deteriorates, but there's always one more branch, and you're always inside it. This isn't a proven theory. Most physicists don't believe the many worlds interpretation implies immortality, and even fewer think it's testable. But the logic holds. And once you understand it, you can't completely ignore the possibility that you're already deep in the version of reality, where you should have died many times, but didn't. And now, you're just living out. Moral luck. 2 drivers. Same car, same road, same speed. Both are texting. Same decision, same carelessness. But only one hits a child crossing the street. One walks away shaken. The other spends the rest of their life in prison. Same choice, different outcome. So, who's more guilty? This is moral luck, a term coined by philosopher Bernard Williams and later expanded by Thomas Nagel. It describes a disturbing contradiction, that we often judge people based not just on what they choose, but on what happens afterward, things they can't control. And it means that morality, the thing we think is anchored in personal responsibility, might actually be warped by fate. Think about it. A soldier who survives becomes a hero. One who dies in a failed mission becomes a statistic. A business gamble that pays off is called genius. The same decision in a crash is called reckless. You admire the brave when they win. You blame the foolish when they don't. And yet, the choices are often the same. The difference is luck. Now here's where it hits closer. Think about your own life, your values, your strength, your self-control. How much of that is you, And how much is circumstance? Were you born with supportive parents? Did you grow up in safety? Did someone believe in you at just the right time? Or did you simply never face the kind of test that would have broken you? Maybe you resist addiction because you've never known real pain. Maybe you're disciplined because the world never tempted you in the right way. Would you still be you if you had been born someone else? Nagel put it simply, we are asked to judge people for what they do, even though what they do is often determined by factors beyond their control. And that should terrify us, because it means that punishment and praise, the foundation of justice, might rest on chance. We call people good or bad, brave or cowardly, selfish or selfless, but those judgments assume they could have done otherwise. Moral luck says, maybe they couldn't, and if they couldn't, then what does that say about guilt or pride? What does that say about you? Would you still call yourself a good person if you had lived their life? Same parents, same trauma, same wiring, same moment, would you still have made the right choice? Or would your goodness have cracked quietly under different weather? You'll never know, and neither will they. The Lifeboat Problem. You're in a lifeboat. There's room for 10 people. There are 11. The sea is rising. The boat is sinking. One person has to go overboard or everyone drowns. No one volunteers. So now what? This is the lifeboat problem, a grim thought experiment introduced by Garrett Hardin in 1974. It's not about abstract morality. It's about triage, scarcity, ethics. When there isn't enough for everyone, what do you do? When survival means choosing who doesn't get to live. Say you draw straws. Say you pick at random. Is that fair? Or should you choose based on age, usefulness, health, guilt? Does the strongest survive, or the quietest? The one with a child? The one who can swim? Who deserves the boat? And who doesn't? Hardin wasn't just talking about lifeboats. He used this as a metaphor for immigration, resource distribution, even foreign aid. His question was harsh. If the lifeboat of a wealthy nation is already full, what happens when others try to climb in? If you pull them in, the boat sinks. If you leave them out, they drown. He argued that the ethics of lifeboat situations aren't about kindness. They're about collapse, because when everyone's desperate, compassion becomes a threat. That's the horror of the lifeboat problem. It turns moral action into sabotage. You're not asked to be kind. You're asked to choose who dies last. Now, take it to your own life. Your company lays off workers. Only 10 can stay. You're in the room. Someone has to go. Your friend is drowning. You can save them, but your own child is calling for help behind you. You're in a hospital with 1 ventilator left. 3 patients need it. Only 1 gets it. What you believe doesn't matter. What you do does. And you can't save everyone. So what kind of person do you become in that moment? Are you the one who says nothing? The one who sacrifices? Or the one who sacrifices? Or the one who quietly holds onto your seat? Your bull while someone else is pushed over the edge. And if you survive, does that mean you did the right thing? Or just that no one stronger was there to throw you overboard? The Repugnant Conclusion. Imagine a perfect world. Let's call it World A. A few billion people, all living rich, full lives, deep relationships, beauty, art, meaning, the kind of existence you'd dream of if you could start over. Now imagine World B. It has far more people, 10 times more, 100 times more, but they don't live rich lives. Their lives are barely above suffering. Not painful, just dull. No love, no beauty, no joy, just tolerable. Now here's the twist. According to the logic of total utilitarianism, World B is better. Why? Because the total sum of happiness across more people is greater than the deep joy of fewer. Even if no one in World B is truly happy, even if no one wants to live that way, even if no one in World A would ever choose to become someone in B, mathematically, B wins. This is the repugnant conclusion introduced by Derek Parfit in 1984. It's one of the most disturbing results in moral philosophy, because it exposes a failure in the logic we often take for granted, that more happiness means a better world. Even if that happiness is shallow, even if the lives creating it are barely worth living. Let's bring it closer. Imagine you're building a society. Would you rather have 12,000 people living extraordinary lives, or 1,000 people whose lives are just okay? What if every new person added a tiny bit of total happiness, but reduced the quality of life for everyone else? Would you keep expanding until there are trillions of people stacked in gray apartment blocks, numb, bored, and barely conscious of anything beautiful? Would that be a better world? Because total happiness is higher, but individual happiness, almost gone. The repugnant conclusion reveals a flaw in our deepest moral instincts, that maximizing good doesn't always feel good, that a future filled with more people might actually be worse, not better. And yet, many ethical systems don't have a way around it. If you believe more happiness is always better, then the logical endpoint is overcrowded misery, a universe of mediocrity, endless lives of just enough. No art, no joy, no meaning, just numbers. Parfit didn't solve the problem. He only showed how terrifying it is. And ever since, philosophers have tried to escape it. They've proposed average happiness, thresholds of dignity, rights-based ethics. But none of them feel satisfying, because once you accept that more people means more good, you've opened the door to something monstrous. And here's the haunting question. If we're already in a world heading toward that conclusion, who's pulling the brakes? Our cities grow, our systems optimize, our pleasures get thinner, our attention shorter, and we call it progress. But maybe we're just slowly trading quality for quantity. Maybe the future isn't a nightmare. Maybe it's just a little bit worse than now, repeated forever, and no one can remember what joy used to feel like. The Omelas Dilemma. There's a city called Omelas. It's perfect. No war, no poverty, no pain. The people are joyful, kind, thoughtful. The children laugh in the streets. Art flourishes. There is music, peace, love. It's not a trick. It's not a fantasy. It's real. But there's a cost. Beneath the city, in a dark, locked room, there's a child. Alone, naked, afraid, filthy, sick, screaming. They're not allowed to leave. No one is allowed to speak to them. They're given just enough food to stay alive, but not enough to hope. And here's the truth. The happiness of Omelas depends entirely on this child's suffering. If the child were freed, or comforted, or even spoken to, the entire city's joy would collapse. Everything would unravel. Everyone in Omelas knows. They all learn eventually. Some go quiet. Some cry. Most accept it. They justify it. They tell themselves, it's only one child. It's necessary. We have no choice. They go back to their lives. But a few people, just a few, walk away. They don't try to fix it. They don't free the child. They just leave. No one knows where they go. But they never return. This is the Omelas Dilemma, a story that functions like a mirror. It asks you not what would you do, but what are you already doing? Because you live in a world where comfort often rests on invisible suffering. Cheap clothes made by exhausted workers, food harvested by underpaid hands, technology mined by child labor, clean streets, built on prisons no one talks about. You might not see the child, but someone, somewhere, is locked in a room. And you might be standing above it. The story doesn't offer answers. It doesn't tell you to save the child. It doesn't praise the ones who walk away. It just asks, which one are you? The one who accepts the deal. The one who closes the door and keeps walking. The one who stays silent because the silence keeps everything running. Or the one who leaves, not to save anyone, but because staying means losing yourself. And if you do walk away, where do you go? There's no promised land, no better city, no ending, just a road. And your decision echoing behind you. The simulation argument. You're watching this screen. You see colors. You hear a voice in your head. You think you're experiencing the real world. But how do you know this world isn't simulated? Not as fiction, as literal computation. That's the simulation argument. A serious philosophical hypothesis, not science fiction. The idea was formalized in 2003 by philosopher Nick Bostrom. He didn't say we are in a simulation. He said that one of three things must be true. Almost no advanced civilization reaches a level where they can run ancestor simulations, ultra-realistic simulations of conscious beings. If they can reach that level, they lose interest in running simulations. Or they do run them. And if so, then there are likely billions, maybe trillions more simulated minds than original biological ones. If Al3 is true, then statistically, you're almost certainly one of the simulated ones. Let's break it down. Assume future civilizations can simulate entire realities. That's not a wild assumption. We already simulate weather, protein folding, city traffic, and human behavior. Game engines get more realistic every year. AI models are already simulating conversations, personalities, and decisions. Scale that up by a few centuries. Add quantum computing, the ability to store entire brains, simulate full environments. Eventually, you could run digital copies of entire civilizations. Now suppose these future societies want to study history, or just entertain themselves. They could run high-fidelity simulations of ancient humans, maybe even full timelines, with billions of agents, and those agents wouldn't know they're simulated. They'd feel pain, fall in love, wonder about existence, just like you do. So if it's possible to run trillions of simulations, and only one original biological reality ever existed, then most minds would be simulated. Statistically, it's more likely that you're one of them. You might say, but everything feels real. That's the point. The simulation wouldn't work if it didn't feel real. Now consider our own progress. In 1990, your phone didn't exist. Today, you carry more computing power than NASA had when they landed on the moon. In the next 50 years, we could map entire human brains, create models with memories, goals, fears, simulations where digital people think they're real. And if we can do that, why assume we're the first? Why assume we're at the bottom of the ladder and not part of someone else's code? There's no known way to disprove the simulation hypothesis. The philosopher David Chalmers calls it a metaphysical hypothesis. It's logically consistent. It doesn't contradict known physics. It just can't be tested from inside. Think about trying to prove your dream. Isn't a dream? While you're still dreaming, that's what we're dealing with. Now consider the implications. If you're in a simulation, the physical laws are just rules in code. Death might be deletion or reboot. Your memories could be implanted. Your suffering could be entertainment. Your entire life could be a controlled experiment or a bug. Would that make your life meaningless? Or would it make every choice more precious? Because if someone is watching, what are you showing them? The simulation argument doesn't tell you what to believe. It only forces a choice. Either we're the first civilization to reach this level of intelligence, and no one will ever run simulations like this in the future, or we're not the first, and we're already inside one. The problem of other minds. The problem of other minds is a fundamental issue in both philosophy of mind and epistemology. It asks a simple but unresolved question. How can you know that anyone other than yourself has conscious experience? You observe behavior. You see people talk, react, express emotion, make decisions, but you never observe consciousness directly. You only infer it from what you see, and inference is not certainty. Philosopher Bertrand Russell outlined the issue clearly. We assume that others have minds because their behavior resembles ours. If I feel pain and scream, and someone else screams in a similar situation, I assume they feel pain too. But this is inductive reasoning, not proof. There's no logical guarantee that their behavior corresponds to inner experience. You could be surrounded by entities, biological or artificial, that behave intelligently without any awareness at all. This problem becomes more serious as artificial intelligence advances. A large language model can now produce human-like dialogue. It can express concern, apologize, offer support, but it has no internal experience. If a system like that can pass as conscious behaviorally, then behavior alone is not a reliable indicator of consciousness. The same logic must apply to humans. You've never accessed another person's mental state directly, so the assumption that others are conscious is at its core unprovable. Thomas Nagel took this further in his essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? He argued that even if we understand the physical structure of a mind, we still don't know what it's like to experience that mind from the inside. Subjective experience, what philosophers call qualia, cannot be captured from the outside. You can measure brain activity. You can map emotions to neural states, but you can't extract what it feels like to be that person. This has implications for ethics, communication, and even legal responsibility. Ethically, much of our behavior assumes others suffer, feel joy, and have preferences. But if we can't verify that, then moral systems based on empathy are resting on an unprovable assumption. In law, intent and mental state are central. But if consciousness is inaccessible, then judgments about belief, guilt, and remorse are based on observed patterns, not verified awareness. Some philosophers attempt to resolve this by appeal to theory of mind, the ability to attribute mental states to others. This develops in children around age 4. But even if you can model another mind, that doesn't prove it exists. It only means your brain treats others as if they're conscious, which may be evolutionarily useful, but it doesn't resolve the epistemological gap. You could imagine a world in which you're the only conscious being. Everyone else behaves normally, speaks, moves, reacts, but there's no subjective experience behind their eyes. No awareness, just functional output. This is known as philosophical solipsism, the idea that only your mind is certain to exist. Everything else is inference. Neuroscience doesn't currently offer a solution. There is no known physical signature that confirms subjective experience. Consciousness correlates with certain brain activity, but correlation is not identity. The hard problem of consciousness, described by David Chalmers, is explaining why physical processes give rise to experience at all. Until that problem is solved, the problem of other minds remains unresolved. The map and the territory. A map is not the land it represents. A menu is not the food it describes. And your understanding of reality is not reality itself. This is the foundation of the thought experiment known as the map and the territory. It highlights a fundamental problem. We experience the world through models, mental, linguistic, mathematical, but these are always approximations. No matter how detailed the model, it is never the thing it describes. The term originates from the Polish-American scientist and semanticist Alfred Korzybski, who stated in 1931, "The map is not the territory." His point was not poetic. It was practical. People often confuse the labels, theories, and concepts they use with the actual objects or phenomena those concepts refer to. This confusion leads to errors in judgment, communication, and even science. Consider language. When you hear the word tree, you don't experience a tree. You process a sound. Your brain pulls up an internal image or meaning. But that image is a construct. It lacks texture, movement, complexity. It's based on previous experience, associations, memory. Your brain doesn't store trees. It stores simplified representations of them. The same applies to people, beliefs, and the world. You interact with compressed models, not with raw reality. In science, this issue is magnified. We use mathematical models to describe everything from gravity to particle behavior. These models are often predictive and useful, but they are not the phenomena themselves. Newtonian physics was once considered complete until Einstein's theory of relativity revealed its limits. Then came quantum mechanics, which further contradicted classical intuitions. Each was a map, effective in its domain, but none was the full territory. Cognitive scientists emphasize the same point. Perception is a filtered, pre-processed stream of information. You don't see the world as it is. You see what your sensory system and brain allow you to see. Vision is limited to a narrow spectrum of light. Sound perception is constrained by frequency. Even time is experienced linearly because that's how your nervous system handles causality. Your experience is not objective reality. It's a biologically constructed model. This becomes dangerous when people treat their models as complete or unquestionable. Religious dogma, political ideology, economic theories. When treated as the territory instead of maps, they become rigid, unable to adapt to new data. People defend the model, even when the evidence contradicts it. This is called reification, treating an abstract idea as if it were a concrete reality, and it leads to distorted judgment. You might believe your memory of an event is accurate, but memory is reconstructive, not photographic. Each time you recall it, you alter it. You are remembering a memory of a memory, and yet you trust it. You believe the internal map reflects what actually happened. But if the map is flawed, then the conclusions you draw are also flawed, and you don't notice. The map and territory distinction also applies to self-identity. You have a model of who you are, your values, your story, your traits. But that model is not fixed. It's built from feedback, culture, language, and reflection. You are not who you think you are. You are who your brain has modeled you to be. And that model is incomplete, biased, subject to change. But it feels permanent, so you protect it, even when it's outdated. In an increasingly abstract world, dominated by algorithms, narratives, and ideology, mistaking maps for territory is no longer a theoretical risk. It's a daily occurrence. We interact with representations. We scroll through compressed personas. We trust statistical models to make decisions about risk, identity, truth. And if we forget that the map is not the territory, we start living inside the map. We navigate the model, not the world. And eventually, we forget the difference. The inverted spectrum, behavior, and identical language, but fundamentally different qualia or subjective experiences. And there's no external test that can reveal the difference. This exposes a limitation in third-person science. Color perception can be measured in terms of wavelength, but the qualitative experience of redness, what it feels like to see red, cannot be accessed from the outside. This is known as the hard problem of consciousness, articulated by David Chalmers. It's not a problem of explaining behavior. It's the problem of explaining why any of it feels like something at all. We can identify neural correlates of color perception, such as activity in area V4 of the visual cortex, but that still doesn't tell us what the experience is like for the person having it. The physical structure might be the same, the output might be the same, but the inner experience could be inverted, completely undetectable. Philosopher Sidney Shoemaker extended this idea. He proposed that even with lifetime perfect behavioral consistency, people might live in different experiential color universes. And since the brain has no built-in color reader that broadcasts its internal state externally, the difference could be permanent, unnoticeable, and irreconcilable. You may never know if your red is someone else's blue, because we built language around agreement, not verification. If a child grows up calling the color of blood red, and their internal sensation is different from yours, there's no contradiction, just a stable mapping from experience to label. So there's no reason to ever question it, which means the illusion of sameness persists by default. Now apply this beyond color. What if pain feels different to different people, but they use the same word? What if love, anger, hunger, guilt are all mapped differently onto private, unobservable experience? What if all human communication is built on the assumption that we feel the same things, when in fact we only behave as if we do? The concept of empathy assumes shared structure, shared states, but the inverted spectrum suggests that there might be a structural illusion at the foundation of all understanding, one that can never be The Münchhausen Trilemma. Every system of knowledge breaks when you ask the same question long enough. How do you know? You believe something. You justify it with a reason. But the reason itself must be justified. And so on. Eventually, this chain of reasoning collapses, not because of any flaw in logic, but because there is nowhere else to go. This is the Münchhausen Trilemma, a foundational problem in epistemology. It states that no belief can be ultimately justified without running into one of three failures: circularity, infinite regress, or arbitrary assumptions. The problem is named after Baron Münchhausen, a fictional character who claimed he pulled himself out of a swamp by tugging on his own hair. The metaphor is simple. You can't bootstrap justification from within the system you're trying to justify. The first option is circular reasoning. This occurs when a belief is justified by another belief that eventually leads back to the original. It is logically invalid, but often disguised in subtle ways. In theology, for instance, some argue God exists because the Bible says so, and the Bible is trustworthy because it is the Word of God. In science, empirical observation is valid because it produces reliable models, and those models are confirmed by empirical observation. In both cases, the system validates itself using its own rules. No contradiction is visible until you realize that nothing is anchored to anything outside the system. The second option is infinite regress. This is the scenario where each belief requires a further justification, which itself requires another, and so on, without end. Philosopher Aristotle recognized this and tried to stop the chain by introducing first principles, but he never solved how those first principles were justified. In logic, this shows up in attempts to define truth. If you say a statement is true because it corresponds to reality, you must now define what correspondence means. Then justify why that correspondence implies truth. Each layer introduces new assumptions. No final ground is ever reached. And if you keep going, all you uncover is the structure of your own need for coherence. The third option is foundationalism. Here, you stop asking for justification by claiming certain beliefs are basic, self-evident, or axiomatic. For example, consciousness exists. The external world is real. Logical contradiction is impossible. Foundationalism is pragmatic. Mathematics uses axioms. Science assumes physical laws are uniform across time and space. Even moral systems often begin with unprovable claims like suffering is bad. But these are declarations, not derivations. And if someone challenges the foundation itself, you have nothing left to say. You're forced to either drop the conversation or smuggle in circular reasoning under a new label. Every attempt to justify knowledge ends in one of these three paths. They are exhaustive. There is no fourth option. Philosophers from Immanuel Kant to Karl Popper have tried to navigate around the trilemma. Popper suggested that knowledge progresses not by justification but by falsification. We never confirm truth, only eliminate error. But even falsification relies on assumptions about logic, evidence, and interpretation. The trilemma remains. In daily life, we ignore this. We trust memory, perception, science, testimony. We operate on the assumption that most of what we believe is justified. But underneath that confidence is a fragile scaffolding of circular logic, bottomless chains, and arbitrary endpoints, which means everything we know, science, ethics, mathematics, language, identity, rests on something we cannot ultimately defend. And yet we keep building anyway, as if the foundation were solid, simply because we have nowhere else to stand. The problem of the criterion. Before you can know anything, you need two things. First, a list of truths, things you're confident are real or reliable. Second, a method for deciding what counts as true in the first place. But here's the problem. You can't figure out what's true without already having a method. And you can't verify your method without already knowing what's true. That circular dependence is called the problem of the criterion. It was formally introduced by the ancient philosopher Sextus Empiricus and revived in modern form by Roderick Chisholm in the 20th century. Chisholm framed it like this: which do we know first, the method of knowing or the specific things we know? And whichever one you choose, the other remains unsupported. If you say, we know this method works because it leads to reliable knowledge, then how did you determine the knowledge was reliable? If you say, we know these facts are true because they were discovered using a good method, then how did you determine the method was good? You can't justify one without assuming the other. This is different from the Münchhausen Trilemma. That problem shows that chains of justification can't end securely. The problem of the Criterion shows you can't even start. You're stuck at the first question, where do you begin? Do you identify truths and hope they reveal a method, or identify a method and hope it leads to truth? Each requires the other, but neither can come first. Take science. We say it uses empirical observation and hypothesis testing to generate knowledge. But how did we determine that method was valid? Because it produced accurate predictions. That assumes we already know what accuracy looks like, which assumes a standard, which assumes a method. So science becomes circular too, practically reliable, yes, but philosophically vulnerable at its foundation. Religion has the same issue. If you say, I trust Scripture, then the next question is, why that Scripture? If the answer is, because it reveals truth, then how do you know what counts as truth? If you've already decided which text to believe before testing it. If your method is faith, how do you determine which belief system is worth applying it to? There's no neutral starting point, only a loop. Even basic perception runs into this. You trust your senses, you open your eyes and see a chair, you reach out and touch it. But how do you know your senses are accurate? You might say, because they've been reliable in the past. But that relies on memory, another mental process you'd have to trust without external validation. So your entire perceptual world is built on unverified mechanisms that you only assume are working because they haven't yet contradicted themselves. And that's not proof. It's conditional belief. Philosopher Chisholm tried to categorize responses. Particularists say, we know some truths. Let's build the method from those. Methodists say, we start with a method and derive knowledge from it. Skeptics say, we can't answer either question, so we don't really know anything. And the skeptic position is disturbingly consistent. It's not that we know nothing, it's that we don't know how we know anything and can't escape the loop long enough to verify that we're right. Which leaves us operating on unexamined assumptions because waiting for certainty never ends. Newcomb's paradox. You walk into a room and find two boxes. Box A is transparent and contains $1,000. Box B is opaque. You don't know what's inside. You're told that a powerful predictor, one that has been correct every time in the past, has already made a prediction about you. If the predictor believed you would take only box B, then box B contains $1,000. If the predictor believed you would take both boxes, then box B contains nothing. Box A always has $1,000 no matter what. You now have a choice. Do you take both boxes or just box B? This is Newcomb's paradox, introduced by physicist William Newcomb and later analyzed in depth by philosopher Robert Nozick. At first glance, the choice seems simple. If the prediction has already been made, the contents of the boxes are fixed. So no matter what's in box B, taking both guarantees $1,000 more than taking just one. That's called the dominance principle in decision theory. If one option is always better than another, you should take it. So take both boxes. But then you consider the track record of the predictor. It's perfect. If it predicted you would take both, box B is empty. If it predicted you'd take only box B, it contains 1,000 thousands. So maybe the predictor is using a detailed simulation of your brain or has a deterministic model of your psychology. Maybe your decision right now causally depends on that earlier prediction, even though you can't change the past. If that's the case, taking only box B yields the best expected value. Now you're choosing between logical consistency and causal influence. This creates two camps. One boxers say, rational agents should act as if their current decision influences the prediction. Because if they do, they get 1,000. Two boxers say, the prediction is already made. Your action now can't change it. So take the free $1,000 in box A. Regardless of what's in box B, both arguments are internally valid, but they rely on different models of what a decision actually is. In one model, decisions are isolated events. They don't reach backward in time. Free will happens in the present. In that model, two-boxing is rational. In another model, decisions are the output of a deterministic or predictable system. Your current action reveals something about what must have already been predicted. In that model, one-boxing is the only way to win. This isn't just philosophical. It challenges the foundations of AI, game theory, and behavioral economics. Because if agents can predict each other and base choices on those predictions, then the act of deciding changes the landscape before the choice is made. Variants of Newcomb's paradox appear in real life. If your boss believes you're going to quit, they might not give you a promotion. So quitting later appears to be the rational choice, but it only became rational because of the earlier expectation. If a judge believes you're likely to commit another crime, they sentence you more harshly. So your future action is shaped by a belief that may not be based on actual behavior. Sometimes the optimal choice only exists because someone believed it would. And the more accurate their model of you is, the less free your choice becomes. But if you act as if the prediction controls you. Pascal's wager. The 17th century mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal proposed a question that has lasted centuries. What do you lose by believing in God if he doesn't exist? And what do you risk by not believing if he does? This is Pascal's wager, not a theological argument, but a decision theory model. It's about risk management under uncertainty. Pascal's reasoning is structured as a payoff matrix. There are two possible states: God exists, God does not exist. And two actions: you believe in God, you don't. If God does not exist, then belief or disbelief results in similar limited outcomes. A finite life, followed by nothing. But if God does exist, then belief brings infinite reward, eternal salvation. Disbelief brings infinite punishment, eternal suffering. So in terms of expected value, the safe bet is to believe. Even if the probability that God exists is extremely low, the potential payoff is infinite. Pascal wasn't trying to prove God. He admitted he couldn't. Instead, he reframed belief as a rational gamble under ignorance. This wasn't a spiritual conclusion. It was a mathematical one. Critics quickly challenged it. The many gods objection points out that the wager assumes a specific kind of God. But what if another God exists, one that rewards doubt, punishes blind faith, or only saves skeptics? In that case, believing in the wrong God might be worse than disbelief. Pascal's matrix expands into chaos the moment you admit religious diversity. Another critique targets authenticity. If someone believes purely out of self-interest, is that belief genuine? If salvation depends on sincerity, then strategic belief might not count. Pascal anticipated this. He suggested that people start with practice, attend rituals, pray, act as if they believe, and that over time, belief might follow behavior. This moves the wager from reasoning to habit, implying belief can be cultivated even without conviction. Modern philosophers also question the wager's framework. Decision theory usually assumes measurable probabilities and repeatable bets. Pascal's wager deals with a one-time all-or-nothing event. You can't rerun the afterlife. There's no feedback, no update, no calibration. And if belief is treated as a rational calculation, then it ceases to be a moral or spiritual act. It becomes actuarial. Some versions of the wager are updated for secular contexts. You might believe in environmental catastrophe, AI risk, or civilizational collapse. You can't prove they'll happen, but if the downside is large enough, belief or at least preparation may still be rational. The logic generalizes. If the cost of being wrong is catastrophic, then even low-probability threats may deserve attention. But once you accept that structure, you have to decide which existential risks are worth reorganizing your life around. Hobbes' state of nature. In 1651, philosopher Thomas Hobbes asked a simple but brutal question: what would humans be like if there were no government? No law, No police, no courts, no one to enforce contracts or punish violence. His answer became one of the most famous phrases in political theory. Life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. This is the state of nature. Hobbes' thought experiment about humanity before civilization. Hobbes assumed that without a central authority to keep people in check, humans would act primarily out of self-interest. Even if people weren't malicious, they'd be driven by fear, competition, and the desire for self-preservation. Trust would collapse, property would be insecure, every promise would be fragile. Even peaceful people would arm themselves, just in case others turned violent. And that alone would be enough to justify preemptive strikes. This isn't a prediction about savagery, it's a model of rational behavior under anarchy. Hobbes didn't believe people were evil. He believed they were rational. And in a world with no rules, rational agents would prepare for the worst. The only safety would come from power, either having it or submitting to it. To escape this condition, Hobbes proposed a social contract. Individuals give up some freedom in exchange for security. They surrender power to a sovereign authority, a ruler or state capable of enforcing order. This wasn't about morality. It was about survival. Without a common power to instill fear, he wrote, covenants are but words. Modern political theorists have challenged Hobbes' view. Jean-Jacques Rousseau famously disagreed, arguing that humans in the state of nature were cooperative and peaceful, that civilization itself introduced inequality and conflict. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have found evidence for both sides. Some groups share resources and punish selfishness through social pressure. Others show patterns of violence and retribution when no central authority exists. The data remains contested, but Hobbes' framing remains influential because of its structure, not its conclusions. The state of nature isn't about prehistory. It's about modeling what happens when institutions collapse. You see it in failed states, in civil wars, in refugee zones. When police retreat, when courts dissolve, when no one is watching, what rules remain? And when power is gone, what does rationality become? The contract only holds if people believe in the enforcer. Once that belief is gone, each person must ask what they're willing to do to survive. The invisible hand. In 1776, economist and philosopher Adam Smith made a controversial claim. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. His idea was simple but radical. If individuals pursue their own self-interest, society benefits as a whole. This became known as the invisible hand. According to Smith, when markets are left alone, free from central planning or control, they self-organize into systems of surprising efficiency. Each person acts for themselves, but prices, supply, and demand adjust automatically, and coordination emerges without any one person managing it. This idea reshaped the foundations of economics and political theory. In classical liberalism, spontaneous order became a core principle. That order can arise not from rules imposed top-down, but from countless individual choices made bottom-up. You don't need a planner to allocate bread. You need buyers, sellers, and competition. The price mechanism carries information. It reflects scarcity, value, and demand. It tells producers what to make, how much, and for whom, all without centralized command. But the invisible hand is not neutral. It assumes several conditions: that participants are rational, that they act freely, that markets are competitive, that externalities, like pollution or exploitation, are accounted for. In practice, none of these conditions are perfectly met. When corporations collude, when monopolies form, when consumers are misinformed, the invisible hand can misallocate resources, distort incentives, and reinforce inequality. Smith himself recognized this. He warned against concentrated power, predatory behavior, and political manipulation by private interests. The invisible hand was never meant to excuse all market behavior, only to describe a specific kind of decentralized efficiency under strict assumptions. The 20th century saw the idea tested under pressure. In the Soviet Union, planners attempted to manage an entire economy from the top down. The result was inefficiency, shortage, and collapse. In contrast, Hayek argued that no planner could ever gather enough knowledge to match the information embedded in a functioning market. But unregulated capitalism has its own failures: financial crises, environmental collapse, exploitation of labor. The invisible hand can guide coordination, but it can't guarantee fairness or long-term stability. It generates patterns without purpose. It moves wealth without judgment, and it assumes that what emerges, however uneven, however brutal, still qualifies as order. The Ring of Gyges. In Plato's Republic, a character named Glaucon poses a challenge to Socrates. He tells the story of Gyges, a shepherd who discovers a ring buried in the ground. When he puts it on, he realizes it grants him invisibility. He can walk unseen, act without consequence, bypass laws, take whatever he wants. With no one to stop him, Gyges seduces the queen, kills the king, and takes the throne. Now the question: would anyone behave morally if they could never be caught? This is the Ring of Gyges thought experiment. It's not about magic, it's about accountability. It asks whether morality is genuine or just a strategy for avoiding punishment. Do we do good because it's right, or because it's safer? Plato uses the story to probe the foundations of justice. If people behave only because they fear consequences, then morality is not a virtue, it's a calculation. If someone had absolute freedom, total power with no oversight, would they still choose honesty, restraint, compassion, or would they take what they want? Because no one can stop them. This problem echoes through modern ethics. In economics, it resembles moral hazard. When someone is insulated from the consequences of risk, they are more likely to act recklessly. In psychology, it relates to de-individuation, the tendency for people to lose self-control when they believe they're anonymous or untraceable. In technology, it appears in online platforms. People behave differently under pseudonyms, behind screens, outside of legal reach. The ring exists now. It's digital, it's distributed, and it's difficult to remove. Philosophers have tried to answer Gyges in different ways. Immanuel Kant argued that moral action must come from duty, not consequence. A person is only moral if they act rightly, even when it costs them. Utilitarians like John Stuart Mill would say that if Gyges' actions increased total happiness, they could be justified, even if they were done invisibly. Virtue ethicists would focus on character. Would Gyges still be just, even with no fear of exposure? But no answer can bypass the core discomfort. If you strip away all surveillance, all feedback, all reward, what remains of ethics? And if the only thing stopping you is the knowledge that someone might find out, then what exactly do you think morality is? Rawls' difference principle. In his 1971 book, A Theory of Justice, philosopher John Rawls proposed a new way to think about fairness. He began with a thought experiment. Imagine you don't know who you'll be in society. You don't know your class, race, intelligence, health, or even your values. This is the veil of ignorance. From behind this veil, Rawls asked, what kind of society would rational people choose? He argued they would design two basic principles of justice. The first guarantees basic liberties for all. The second, the more controversial one, is known as the difference principle. It says inequalities are only justified if they benefit the least advantaged members of society. This doesn't mean everyone must be equal. It means every inequality must improve the position of those at the bottom. If someone earns more, has more power, or access to better tools, that's acceptable, but only if their success helps raise the floor for everyone else. For example, a surgeon may be paid more than a nurse, but if that higher pay is necessary to attract skill that saves more lives, the inequality can be justified under the difference principle. If a CEO earns 100 times more than a factory worker, but uses their position to expand access, create jobs, and improve worker conditions, then the inequality is not just permissible, it's required. But if the gains at the top come at the direct expense of the bottom, Rawls' framework rejects it. This challenges most modern economic systems. Rawls wasn't a socialist. He accepted markets and incentives, but he insisted that morality, not efficiency, must be the final test of social structure. The idea has influenced public policy debates, especially in welfare economics and taxation. Progressive taxation, universal health care, and public education are often justified as mechanisms that align with Rawls' principles. They allow inequality, so long as it results in better outcomes for the least advantaged. But critics raise hard questions. How do you measure who counts as least advantaged? Do we evaluate outcomes or opportunities? If one person is born with chronic illness and another with inherited wealth, how do you compare their circumstances in any consistent way? And who decides whether an inequality is justified? The state, markets, public opinion. The difference principle offers a moral guideline, but in practice, its application depends on contested assumptions about value, merit, and harm. Even Rawls acknowledged the difficulty of defining advantage without importing subjective judgments about what constitutes a good life. And once those assumptions enter the equation, the hedonistic paradox. If happiness is the goal, then it makes sense to pursue it. But the more directly you chase pleasure, the more elusive it becomes. This is the hedonistic paradox. Philosopher Henry Sidgwick observed it in the 19th century. The impulse towards pleasure, if too predominant, defeats its own aim. The contradiction is clear. If you aim at pleasure as your primary objective, you often fail to experience it. And if you abandon the goal and focus on something else, pleasure tends to follow. So the pursuit of happiness works best when it's not the pursuit of happiness. This paradox has been echoed in psychology. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, "Happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue." Frankl believed that people find happiness not by chasing it but by committing to meaning, purpose, or responsibility. When people orient their lives toward external goals, projects, values, others, fulfillment arises as a side effect. But when happiness becomes the central objective, it becomes self-referential. You start asking, "Am I happy yet?" And the moment you ask that, the illusion breaks. This is backed by empirical research. Studies on positive effects show that people who obsess over maximizing pleasure often report lower life satisfaction. Psychologists call this experiential avoidance. When people structure their lives to avoid discomfort and maximize pleasure, they often become more anxious, more reactive, and less resilient. The emotional feedback loop collapses when attention is focused inward. Instead of enjoying the present, people evaluate it. Instead of being absorbed in an activity, they measure it for reward. And instead of happiness, they end up with surveillance. The paradox applies to relationships as well. Seeking intimacy for emotional reward often undermines genuine connection. If you treat others as instruments of your own happiness, you fail to build the trust, reciprocity, and vulnerability that make happiness possible. The same is true for art, learning, exploration, even altruism. If the motive is primarily pleasure, then every experience becomes a transaction, and meaning collapses under the weight of self-interest. Philosopher John Stuart Mill, a defender of utilitarian ethics, admitted this problem in his autobiography. After devoting himself to the goal of maximizing utility, he suffered a psychological breakdown in his early 20s. He wrote, "The happiness of which I was in pursuit ceased to appear to me as an end in itself." Mill recovered not by abandoning pleasure, but by finding satisfaction in literature, human connection, and philosophical reflection, things that weren't aimed at happiness directly, but that made life worth continuing. The hedonistic paradox doesn't deny that pleasure exists. It doesn't say happiness is meaningless. It says that happiness may be incompatible with self-centered pursuit. And when you aim to control those moments, optimize them, extend them, reproduce them, you often lose them entirely. The tragedy of the commons. You have a shared pasture, open to everyone in the village. Each herder can let their cattle graze freely. The land is abundant. the system's simple. No one owns it, but everyone benefits. At first, it works. Everyone takes what they need. But eventually, one herder thinks, if I add just one more cow, I'll get more milk, more income. The field still looks fine. Then another herder does the same. And another. And soon, the grass is gone. The land eroded and the system collapses. No one intended to destroy the resource. Each person acted in rational self-interest. But collectively, they created irreversible damage. This is the tragedy of the commons, a term popularized by ecologist Garrett Hardin in 1968. It describes how individuals, acting independently and rationally according to their own self-interest, can ultimately destroy a shared, limited resource, even when it is clear that it is not in anyone's long-term interest to do so. This isn't just a metaphor. It's a pattern. You see it in overfishing. If every fishing company wants to maximize their annual catch, they may deplete the fish population beyond recovery. No single boat is to blame, but the entire system fails. You see it in climate change. Fossil fuel consumption benefits each nation economically, but global emissions accumulate, and no nation, acting alone, can fix the imbalance they help to create. You see it in congested highways, overcrowded servers, data pollution, and public deforestation. In each case, the resource is shared, and in each case, rational behavior at the individual level generates irrational outcomes at the collective level. The tragedy isn't that people are malicious, it's that incentives are misaligned. Each actor bears only a fraction of the cost of overuse, but gains the full benefit of their own consumption. So unless coordination exists, or some external regulation is enforced, the default behavior is extraction, even when extraction is self-destructive. Economists model this using game theory. It's a variation of the prisoner's dilemma, where cooperation yields the best group outcome, but defection always benefits the individual in the short term. Unless there's punishment, monitoring, or cultural norms that sustain cooperation, defection dominates. And even well-informed, well-intentioned actors can find themselves trapped in a system where doing the right thing feels like losing. Some systems develop social norms that prevent collapse. Communities self-regulate. Villages create grazing quotas. Digital spaces enforce bandwidth caps. But these solutions are fragile. They rely on trust, enforcement, or collective memory. And they often erode under pressure, growth, or the introduction of anonymous actors. Hardin suggested that tragedy is inevitable unless the commons is either privatized or strictly managed by centralized authority. Others argue that commons can be preserved by cooperation, but only under very specific conditions like small group sizes, repeated interaction, and transparent communication. And when those conditions scale beyond a certain threshold, the prisoner's dilemma. Two suspects are arrested. They're placed in separate rooms. Each is given the same offer. If you betray the other and they stay silent, you go free and they get 10 years. If you both betray each other, you each get 5 years. If you both stay silent, you each get 1 year. There's no communication, no trust. They must choose without knowing what the other will do. And if they're rational, they both betray and both get 5 years. Even though mutual silence would have left them with just one. This is the prisoner's dilemma, first formalized in the 1950s by Merrill Flood and Melvin Drescher, and later analyzed by Albert Tucker. It's one of the most important models in decision theory and strategic behavior. The setup reveals a disturbing result. When individuals act in their own rational self-interest, they can create worse outcomes for everyone. Defection is safer, cooperation is better, but cooperation depends on trust, something not guaranteed in isolated competitive systems. This pattern appears far beyond police interrogations. In nuclear arms races, both nations would benefit from disarmament, but each fears being the one left unarmed. In corporate pricing, companies could keep profits high by maintaining price floors, but each has the incentive to undercut the other, triggering a race to the bottom. In environmental policy, countries benefit from collective emissions reductions, but each fears economic disadvantage if they cooperate, while others defect. And in personal relationships, two people may both want reconciliation, but each waits for the other to make the first move. So silence hardens into distance, not because of hostility, but because of structure. Variants of the dilemma have been studied extensively through repeated games. In the iterated prisoner's dilemma, players interact multiple times, allowing for patterns like forgiveness, retaliation, or cooperation. Strategies like tit for tat, cooperate first, then mirror the other player's last move, have performed well in simulations, but even these break down under noise, misunderstanding, or exploitation. And in one-shot games, defection remains the dominant strategy. The dilemma is not about morality. It's about incentives. You don't need bad actors to create bad outcomes. You just need a system that rewards individual safety more than collective success. And when each person optimizes for themselves, the group rationally fails. The no-exit scenario. A no-exit scenario is a system in which individuals remain trapped, not by physical barriers, but by internalized constraints, structural pressures, or learned inaction. The door exists. It is technically open, but the individual no longer sees it as viable. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre illustrated this in No Exit, a play where three characters are locked in a room for eternity. There are no punishments, no guards, no flames, only each other. The torment comes from reflection, dependency, and the inability to escape one's own social self. Freedom is present in name only. Sartre's existentialist conclusion: you are not simply trapped by the room, you are trapped by the roles you can't stop performing. Psychological research supports this. Learned helplessness, first demonstrated by Martin Seligman, occurs when repeated exposure to uncontrollable stress leads an individual to stop attempting escape, even when escape becomes possible. Over time, behavior becomes shaped less by options and more by expectations. The subject stays not because of force, but because they've internalized futility. This dynamic scales. In employment systems, you are free to resign, but that freedom is counterweighted by health insurance loss, housing insecurity, or resume gaps. In academia, students can drop out, but social shame, sunk costs, and visa constraints make the exit impractical. In digital platforms, users can leave at any time, but they lose connection, relevance, identity, assets stored within the platform's architecture. The system offers exit but structures itself to punish those who use it. This is not coercion. It's containment through incentive design. When exit becomes a theoretical right with disproportionate cost, most people stay. When resistance is always available but never encouraged, it disappears from the imagination. And when people remain, not because they have to, but because every alternative feels worse, you no longer need a wall to build a prison. The Last Human. The Last Human thought experiment asks, what happens to morality, purpose, and value? When a single person becomes the final conscious being in existence, there are no others. No society, no witnesses, no future generations, just one human, alive at the end of civilization. Philosopher Derek Parfit used variations of this idea to challenge assumptions about ethics. If no one else exists, can anything still be morally right or wrong? Suppose the last human spends their final hours destroying works of art, burning forests, or sabotaging what remains of a ruined earth. Is it still wrong? Even though no one is left to suffer, there's no one to be hurt, no social contract, no descendants to inherit the consequences. Yet the instinct remains, something about it feels wrong. This scenario strips morality of its typical foundations. There's no utility, no relational harm, no cultural code to enforce behavior. You're left with only the agent and the weight of their decisions in a world that can no longer respond. Kantian ethics would suggest that actions still matter, that reason alone can generate moral duty regardless of consequences. But if morality depends on treating others as ends, what happens when there are no others? From a utilitarian view, the last human's actions are meaningless, because there is no one left to benefit or suffer. Destruction causes no net suffering. Preservation offers no future gains. If ethics is consequence-based, then all actions become neutral once the field of consequence is empty. But that raises a deeper problem. Was morality ever real, or only ever instrumental? And if humans disappear, does moral truth disappear with them? This thought experiment also exposes a psychological tension. Much of human behavior is shaped by audience, real or imagined. We moderate behavior because we are seen. We justify our choices because someone might remember, take away community, memory and judgment, and the moral architecture begins to collapse. Yet some argue that integrity is defined precisely by how you act. When no one is watching, when no reward or punishment is possible. If the last human still plants a tree or preserves a structure they'll never see completed, is that act moral, irrational, or simply symbolic? The last human thought experiment doesn't just ask whether ethics can survive without society. It asks whether meaning itself depends on being witnessed, and whether a world without observers still contains anything worth preserving. The Sleeping Beauty Problem. The Sleeping Beauty Problem is a paradox in probability theory that questions how to assign belief when memory and information are restricted. Here's the setup. Sleeping Beauty agrees to undergo an experiment. On Sunday night, she is put to sleep. A fair coin is flipped. If the coin lands heads, she is awakened on Monday, then put back to sleep with her memory of the awakening erased. If the coin lands tails, she is awakened on Monday, then again on Tuesday with memory erased each time. In either case, she never remembers previous awakenings. When she wakes up, she is asked, "What is your credence that the coin landed heads?" At first, the answer seems obvious. The coin is fair, 50% heads, and she already knew the setup in advance. So the correct answer must be is right? That's the halfer position. She gains no new information upon waking, so her belief in heads should remain at 50%. But there's another interpretation. The thirder position argues that when Beauty wakes up, there are three equally likely scenarios she could be in. It's Monday, and the coin landed heads. It's Monday, and the coin landed tails. It's Tuesday, and the coin landed tails. Only one of these corresponds to heads. Two correspond to tails. So under this reasoning, she should assign a full probability to heads and say to tails. This isn't just a technicality. It raises serious questions about how subjective probability works under memory constraints. What counts as new information when your context is reset? Is it fair to reason over possible awakenings, even if Beauty can't distinguish between them? Or should probability only apply to the coin flip, since that's the only truly random event? Philosophers and statisticians have debated this for decades. No consensus exists. Some say the halfer view aligns with Bayesian reasoning. Don't change your belief without new evidence. Others say the thirder view better reflects self-locating belief. You're not just uncertain about the coin, you're uncertain about when you are. And in cases where the number of awakenings depends on the outcome, that matters. This paradox has implications beyond thought experiments. It relates to entropic reasoning, how to interpret probability when you might be a random sample among many observers. It appears in debates about simulation theory, population ethics, and interpretations of quantum mechanics. The Sleeping Beauty problem doesn't reveal a flaw in math. It reveals how fragile belief becomes when consciousness, memory, and time are all uncertain. The problem of empty experience. The problem of empty experience asks whether consciousness can exist in the absence of content. Is it possible to be aware, but aware of nothing? In most discussions of consciousness, experience is assumed to be structured. You see, hear, feel, think. There is something it is like to be you at every moment. But this thought experiment proposes a state where you remain conscious, but there is no sensory input, no thought, no perception, no emotion. A kind of blank awareness, still on, but not pointed at anything. Is that still consciousness? This isn't just a hypothetical. Reports from deep meditative states, particularly in traditions like Zen, Dzogchen, and Theravada, often describe a pure consciousness event, a mental state with no content, no self-reference, no differentiation. Subjects claim they were still there, still experiencing, but could not describe what was experienced. The experience was not of peace or clarity. It was experience itself, stripped of everything else. Some neuroscientists, like Thomas Metzinger, argue that these descriptions point to a kind of minimal phenomenal experience, the baseline flicker of being, without structure. But whether this is genuinely contentless or simply unreportable remains debated. This also intersects with anesthesia studies. Some patients under general anesthesia later report a void-like awareness, not dreams, not memories, just the eerie sense that something persisted when nothing should have. Does that mean their consciousness was never fully switched off? Or are they reconstructing the illusion of continuity afterward? In either case, it blurs the line between being awake and being aware. Artificial intelligence raises the same problem in reverse. A machine might process endless content, text, images, dialogue, but have no awareness of any of it. No conscious substrate, just computation. So is experience possible without content? And is content possible without experience? If consciousness can persist in a state of total emptiness, then the presence of structured experience might not define what it means to be awake at all. The paradox of the preface. You've just finished writing a book. You've double-checked every chapter. You stand by each fact, each conclusion. You believe everything you wrote is true. But in the preface, you add a sentence. Despite my best efforts, there may be some errors in this book. This isn't humility. It's rational, because no complex work is perfect. And now you believe two things: that every statement in the book is true, and that at least one of them is probably false. This is the paradox of the preface. It shows how rational belief can become collectively inconsistent even when each individual belief is justified. You believe every claim in the book, but you also believe that, statistically, not all claims are likely to be correct. So your beliefs, taken together, contradict each other, but none of them, on its own, seems unreasonable. The paradox appears everywhere complex belief systems are involved. A scientist trusts each step in a long chain of experiments, yet accepts that some results may be flawed. A historian believes each event happened, but expects the overall narrative contains some mistakes. A jury finds each piece of testimony credible, while knowing that memory and perception are unreliable. The contradiction is not in the parts, it's in the structure. Logicians have explored whether this is a failure of reasoning or a built-in limit of epistemic systems. Should you withdraw belief from some parts of the book, even if you can't tell which ones are wrong? Or should you hold the contradiction, knowing that your belief system is probabilistic, not absolute? Some have proposed non-monotonic logic, which allows for belief systems that retract or revise as new information appears. Others accept epistemic inconsistency as a practical necessity. The human mind can't hold only fully coherent beliefs and still function in a noisy world. The paradox also touches on the nature of certainty. If you wait until every belief is fully verified and internally consistent, you might never believe anything. So most of the time you move forward with partial trust, not because it's flawless, but because waiting for flawlessness is paralyzing. And if all belief systems contain some contradiction at the edge, then rationality might not mean eliminating error, but continuing anyway, knowing that some of your certainty is probably misplaced. The infinite ethics dilemma. The infinite ethics dilemma arises when we try to apply moral reasoning in a universe that may contain an infinite number of beings or outcomes. In standard ethics, we calculate harm, benefit, and justice by comparing finite consequences. We ask, does this action help more than it harms? Can we make one future better than another? But in an infinite universe, those comparisons collapse, because no matter what you do, the total amount of good or bad is already infinite. And adding or subtracting one action changes nothing measurable. This is a real concern in modern cosmology and moral philosophy. Many versions of the multiverse hypothesis, inflationary models, or string theory landscapes suggest that infinite space and infinite time may contain infinite civilizations. If there are infinite Earth-like planets, then every version of every life choice already exists somewhere, each duplicated an uncountable number of times. Now suppose you donate to save 10 lives. That action also exists elsewhere, infinitely. So the overall number of lives saved remains infinite, whether you donate or not. How do you assign moral weight in a framework where outcomes are already unbounded? This problem is especially acute in utilitarian ethics, which tries to maximize the total amount of well-being. But if the total is already infinite and all options result in infinity, then maximizing becomes undefined. You can't say one infinity is larger than another, at least, not in the way ethical math requires. And if every action you take makes no difference to the total value of the universe, does moral responsibility disappear? One proposal is to focus on local effects. Don't try to change the universe, just improve the part you can see. But this raises another issue. Why is the part you see morally privileged? If all observers matter equally, then limiting ethics to your causal bubble becomes arbitrary. Another option is comparative ethics, not asking about total good, but whether one future is better than another, even if both are infinite. But without a finite baseline, those comparisons still lead to paradoxes. Some actions create more suffering in one corner of infinity, less in another, and infinite uncertainty overall. The dilemma also applies to existential risk. If humanity goes extinct and the future was infinite, have we lost infinite potential happiness? If so, preventing extinction becomes infinitely urgent. But if the multiverse already contains infinite happy civilizations, then our survival contributes nothing unique to the total sum of value. So should we treat our extinction as morally trivial, or as the single most important event in our causal frame? The problem of evil. The problem of evil asks how an all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good God could allow evil and suffering to exist. It is one of the oldest and most persistent arguments against theism. If God is all-powerful, he can prevent evil. If he is all-good, he should want to. But evil exists, so either God is not all-powerful, not all-good, or he does not exist. This is the logical problem of evil, most clearly framed by philosopher Epicurus and later sharpened by David Hume. Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Whence then is evil? The argument forces a contradiction between divine attributes and observed reality. Theists have responded with a variety of defenses. The most common is the free will defense. Evil exists because humans are free to choose, and freedom entails the possibility of moral failure. A world with genuine agency, even at the cost of suffering, is better than a world of moral puppets. But this doesn't account for natural evil, earthquakes, disease, genetic disorders, suffering not caused by human choice. Why design a world where those occur? Another response is soul-making theodicy, proposed by John Hick. It argues that suffering develops moral and spiritual maturity, courage, compassion, perseverance. These traits require adversity. But then suffering becomes instrumental. It is justified by the growth it enables. And not all suffering clearly leads to growth. Some people are destroyed by pain, not refined by it. And infants born to suffer and die raise questions that soul-making cannot answer. Some theologians argue for greater goods that we cannot understand, that God's plan operates on a scale beyond human comprehension. But this creates a problem of epistemic closure. If everything can be justified by mystery, then evil becomes indistinguishable from divine intent. And if we are never in a position to evaluate God's goodness, then what does it mean to say God is good? There are probabilistic versions of the argument too. Even if some evil is compatible with God's existence, the scale and intensity of suffering in the world makes his existence unlikely. Not impossible, but improbable. This version shifts the burden of proof to justify not why some evil exists, but why so much does. The time travel bootstrapping paradox. The bootstrapping paradox occurs when an object, idea, or piece of information is brought back in time and becomes the very thing that causes itself to exist. There is no origin, only a self-sustaining loop. Imagine a time traveler goes back in time with a famous novel. They give the manuscript to a young writer who publishes it as their own. Decades later, the now famous author's work is picked up by the time traveler, who brings it back in time and gives it to the young writer. Where did the novel come from? It was never written, only passed along in a loop. This is the ontological paradox, an effect that causes itself. No first cause, no origin, no author. In science fiction, this shows up frequently. A watch passed between versions of the same person. A musical theme with no composer. A machine built from blueprints, retrieved from the future. These are not just narrative gimmicks. They expose a real tension in the logic of time travel. If causality is a chain, then a closed loop with no beginning breaks the structure of explanation. You can trace the steps, but the moment you ask where it started, there is no answer. Philosopher David Lewis argued that these loops are logically consistent as long as the events in the loop don't contradict one another. If everything in the loop aligns, if the book is always past, the machine always built, then no paradox occurs in a formal sense. But there's still something deeply unsettling about a universe where information exists without origin. This paradox raises questions for physics too. In general relativity, certain solutions like closed time, like curves, allow for paths through space-time that loop back on themselves. In these models, the future influences the past. A particle, or even a person, can interact with their earlier self. And as long as consistency is preserved, the system doesn't break. But what happens to causality when effects don't follow causes, but instead form them? The bootstrapping paradox doesn't violate logic, but it challenges our understanding of explanation. Because when something exists simply because it continues to exist, you're left with a loop that functions perfectly and tells you nothing. The dust speck versus torture dilemma. The dust speck versus torture dilemma, introduced by philosopher Eliezer Yudkowsky, asks whether one act of extreme suffering can be outweighed by an enormous number of minor inconveniences. Here's the setup. You're given two options. One person will be subjected to 50 years of uninterrupted torture. A trillion people will each feel a single dust speck in their eye, just for a moment. Which is the better outcome? Most people instinctively choose the dust speck. A brief irritation, even if widespread, feels morally preferable to long-term agony. But utilitarianism requires that we calculate total disutility. If suffering can be summed, then at some scale, trillions of tiny harms might outweigh a single severe one. So the question becomes, at what point does the quantity of tiny harms become worse than the quality of one massive harm? Yudkowsky pushed this to its extreme in discussions of rational consequentialism. If you reject the torture in favor of dust specks at any scale, are you saying that no amount of microscopic suffering, even spread over an infinite population, could ever outweigh one instance of intense pain? If not, if there is a tipping point, then somewhere out there exists a number so large that you'd choose 50 years of torture to avoid it. Even if that number is a Googleplex, this is more than a hypothetical. It reflects deep tension in aggregate ethics. The idea that harm can be meaningfully added, compared, and traded across individuals. This is the same logic behind public health decisions, risk assessments, and cost-benefit analyses. We accept that small harms add up. Lost time, inconvenience, anxiety, and policy often weighs those against rare but catastrophic outcomes. The dust speck paradox pushes this logic to its limit and asks whether we really believe it holds when numbers become incomprehensibly large. Critics argue that this framing flattens the moral landscape. They claim that qualitative suffering like torture should not be outweighed by aggregate trivialities. Some ethical frameworks reject the idea of aggregating suffering altogether. Deontologists may say that torture is categorically wrong, no matter how many people avoid dust specks because of it. Threshold deontologists allow for trade-offs, but only up to a certain limit. Once that limit is crossed, rights cannot be violated. So even if 100 people are spared a dust speck, inflicting torture may still be impermissible. There's also a psychological aspect. Humans are poor at processing scale. Our moral intuitions are shaped by close-up suffering, not vast arithmetic. We see one person in pain and empathize. We see statistical pain spread across trillions and feel nothing. This scope in sensitivity is well documented. People are willing to pay roughly the same amount to save 2 lives as to save 2,000. If our moral intuitions break at scale, should we trust them when answering questions like this? This dilemma also highlights a broader risk. Torture gets treated as an abstraction. When you say 50 years of torture, the phrase may lose its weight. But imagine the details. Sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, sustained injury, hopelessness, day after day, year after year. Then compare that to a speck of dust. A blink, an itch. Is it reasonable to say that there exists a number of dust specks that morally outweigh that experience? And if you say no, if you treat severe suffering as morally untradeable, what does that do to the idea of total utility as a moral compass? The paradox of tolerance. The paradox of tolerance, introduced by philosopher Karl Popper in 1945, asks whether a tolerant society should tolerate intolerance. It seems contradictory. Tolerance implies openness, freedom of speech, belief, expression. But what happens when that freedom is used to promote ideologies that seek to destroy tolerance itself? Should a tolerant society defend itself by being intolerant toward the intolerant? Popper's warning came in response to fascism. He wrote, "Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed, and tolerance with them." This isn't just historical theory, it's a structural trap. A society that allows speech advocating for authoritarianism, racial supremacy, or political violence may enable the very forces that dismantle its foundations. And once power is lost, tolerance is no longer an option. The paradox challenges the core of liberal democracy. Most liberal systems are built on neutral principles, free speech, open dialogue, equal protection under the law. But these same principles can be exploited by anti-democratic movements. A group can rise through democratic means and then dismantle the system that enabled it. The Nazi Party gained political power in Weimar Germany through legal processes, before outlawing dissent and destroying pluralism from within. Popper argued that in such cases, tolerance must not extend to those who would use it to end tolerance itself. But this raises new problems. Who decides what counts as intolerant? How do you define the boundary between dangerous ideology and unpopular speech? If you grant the state, or any institution, the power to silence certain views, you risk suppressing legitimate dissent, minority perspectives, or future reformers. Historically, governments have labeled political threats as intolerant, not to protect democracy, but to entrench control. Censorship can cut both ways. Some modern thinkers propose a threshold model. Tolerate all views, no matter how distasteful, until those views begin to incite violence, advocate genocide, or organize to dismantle pluralism. But even then, enforcement requires judgment. And once speech is linked to potential harm, the line between dangerous idea and inconvenient truth becomes easier to manipulate. Popper acknowledged this risk. His version of defensive intolerance was narrow and reluctant, a last resort, not a tool of routine governance. The non-identity problem. Imagine a woman is deciding whether to have a child now, despite knowing that her current medical condition would likely cause the child to be born with a disability. If she waits a few months for treatment, she could conceive a different child who would likely be healthy. She chooses to proceed now. The child is born, disabled, but with a life worth living. Now ask, did she harm the child? The child would not have existed otherwise. Their only alternative was non-existence. This is the non-identity problem, first formalized by philosopher Derek Parfit. It reveals a conflict between three intuitions. We can wrong someone only if we make them worse off than they otherwise would have been. The disabled child is not worse off than they would have been. They would not have existed. Yet it still seems wrong to deliberately bring a child into the world under harmful conditions. These three claims can't all be true at once. You must give one up, and each option has disturbing consequences. The problem intensifies in large-scale policy. Suppose a government implements short-term environmental policy that increases pollution. This policy affects energy prices, shifts employment, and ultimately changes who meets whom, who has children with whom, and which people are born decades later. Now imagine that those future people live in a degraded environment, but their lives are still worth living. Did the policy harm them? By changing the timing of conception, it didn't make their lives worse, it made them exist. Without that policy, they never would have been born. If the only alternative to their existence is non-existence, can they say they were harmed? This creates moral paralysis in long-term planning. Every choice we make today affects who will exist in the future. The people who inherit the world 200 years from now might not exist without today's emissions, wars, or economic systems. If future people can't be harmed by actions that bring them into existence, then many intuitively unethical policies become morally unproblematic. You could justify almost any long-term harm by saying, these are the people it led to. Philosophers have proposed responses. Some argue that impersonal principles must guide ethics, that we should maximize overall welfare, regardless of which individuals come to exist. Others say that moral responsibility isn't about harm, but about whether the choice itself is justifiable, even if it harms no one directly. Still others suggest redefining harm itself to include cases where people are brought into existence in ways that are predictably worse, even if they had no alternative identity. Each of these responses trades clarity for coherence. The Gettier Problem. Question: belief and justification don't guarantee knowledge. If luck plays a decisive role in the outcome, the problem has since been extended into countless domains. A scientist makes a correct prediction based on faulty data. A student guesses the right answer, but with incorrect reasoning. A detective solves a case using logic that happens to align with a coincidence. Each case satisfies the classic conditions, and each case feels like not knowledge. Philosophers have proposed fixes. Some suggest adding a fourth condition, that the justification must be truth-tracking. Your belief must reliably follow the truth, even in nearby hypothetical scenarios. Others propose causal theories of knowledge. Your belief must be caused by the truth in the right way. Some try to introduce defeasibility, that knowledge must not be based on reasons that could easily have been false. But no consensus has emerged. Each patch creates new problems, and each definition invites new Gettier-style counterexamples. In practice, we still act as if knowledge is stable. We trust expert claims, scientific theories, and personal memories. But the Gettier problem reveals a deep structural uncertainty, that even when your beliefs are true and carefully justified, you may still be right by mistake. The paradox of voting. You go to the polls, you cast your vote in a national election. You know it probably won't matter. Your single vote is almost certainly not the deciding one. Yet you vote anyway. Why? This is the paradox of voting, also known as the Downs paradox, named after economist Anthony Downs. It asks if the chance that your vote will decide an election is astronomically small, and if voting carries a cost, however minor, then why would any rational person vote? From a purely self-interested cost-benefit standpoint, voting is irrational. The probability of affecting the outcome is near zero. The reward is negligible. The time spent, however minimal, outweighs the personal payoff. And yet people vote by the millions. Economists and political theorists have proposed different explanations. One is instrumental rationality. You vote not because your vote changes the outcome, but because it's a low-cost way to express your preference, like sending a signal. But if a signal disappears into a sea of millions, what is it signaling to? Another view is expressive voting. People vote for the same reason they cheer at sports games or wear political symbols, to affirm identity, values, and emotional affiliation. Voting becomes a kind of ritual, a statement to oneself, not to the system. But that doesn't resolve the original paradox. It just shifts the motivation away from impact toward performance. Some have invoked collective rationality. If no one votes, democracy collapses. So individuals vote to preserve the system, not to win an election. But this again relies on a kind of moral intuition, not a rational calculation. No one vote sustains democracy, and every individual faces the same negligible influence. Yet the system persists, built on choices that don't make sense in isolation. Then there's the free rider problem. Democracy produces benefits for everyone, but relies on individual participation. If everyone else shows up, you can skip it and still enjoy the outcome. If no one shows up, your vote alone won't fix it. So the rational actor free rides until too many people do the same. And then the system begins to fail. In practice, people often overestimate the power of their vote. Cognitive biases like action bias and availability heuristics make outcomes feel closer, more personal, more winnable. We remember close elections. We imagine decisive moments. We inflate the importance of our role in collective outcomes. And this illusion sustains participation in a system where logic alone might not. The knowledge argument reversed. The knowledge argument reversed asks a provocative question. If someone has a subjective experience, rich, emotional, sensory, can that experience be fully explained in objective terms? It inverts the original Mary's Room thought experiment, where a scientist knows everything physical about color but has never seen it. Here, the question is not whether physical knowledge misses something, but whether experience alone gives you any knowledge at all. Suppose someone sees the color red for the first time. They feel its emotional resonance, danger, warmth, intensity, but they know nothing about light wavelengths, neurobiology, or optics. Do they actually know anything about red, or do they just feel something? Now suppose you ask them to describe what red is, in a way that could be used to recreate it for someone who's never experienced it. Can they transmit that knowledge? Or is the experience locked? Vivid, but incommunicable. This reversal cuts to the heart of the hard problem of consciousness. While the original argument challenged the limits of physicalism, the reversed version challenges the limits of subjectivity. What if raw experience doesn't generate knowledge, but illusion? You feel like you understand pain, love, color, joy. But can you articulate that understanding in any way that survives outside your own mind? If not, what exactly have you learned? In neuroscience, researchers can measure the correlates of experience, brain activity, hormone release, behavioral changes, but the inner texture of those moments, what it feels like, remains inaccessible. And that inaccessibility may not be because science has failed, but because experience is structurally inarticulate. You can have it, but you can't explain it. You can remember it, but not transfer it. You might assume that feeling something gives you truth, but it might only give you a point of view. This matters in ethics, law, AI, and communication. Can a machine that simulates pain ever understand it? If someone has trauma but can't verbalize it, does the experience carry epistemic weight? Can we trust feeling as a source of knowledge? Or is feeling simply private data, impossible to confirm, replicate, or debate? The reversed knowledge argument doesn't deny experience. It questions whether subjective experience can ever become shareable insight, and if it can't, whether consciousness is not a gateway to knowledge, but a loop you're permanently locked inside. The black hole information paradox. The black hole information paradox asks whether information that falls into a black hole is lost forever, violating the most basic laws of quantum mechanics. It is one of the most serious unresolved conflicts between general relativity and quantum theory, and it forces a choice between three unthinkable options: lose information, break unitarity, or reject something we thought was fundamental about spacetime. Here's the setup. According to general relativity, black holes form when mass is compressed into a singularity, a point of infinite density surrounded by an event horizon. Anything that crosses the horizon can't escape, not even light. But in the 1970s, Stephen Hawking showed that black holes aren't completely black. Quantum effects at the event horizon cause them to emit radiation, now called Hawking radiation. Over time, this radiation causes the black hole to shrink and eventually evaporate. The problem is this: Hawking radiation is random. It appears to contain no information about what fell into the black hole. So when the black hole disappears, so does the information. But that breaks quantum mechanics. In quantum theory, information is never destroyed. The evolution of a quantum system is unitary, meaning the present can always be used to reconstruct the past. Even if atoms are scattered or entangled, their information is preserved somewhere in the system. So if black holes erase information, they don't just destroy matter, they destroy determinism. The universe becomes a place where some processes leave no trace. And that's not supposed to be possible. This created a massive conflict. General relativity says black holes erase the past. Quantum mechanics says that's impossible. Something has to give. For decades, physicists argued about which theory would break. Some proposed that information leaks out slowly during evaporation, encoded in the radiation in ways we don't yet understand. Others believed in black hole complementarity, where information both escapes and stays trapped, depending on how you observe the system. Then came the firewall paradox, which suggested that preserving information might require burning up anything that falls into a black hole. At the event horizon, violating Einstein's smooth geometry of space. No proposal is fully accepted. Each one trades away something we thought was sacred. And there's a deeper problem. If information can be lost in black holes, what about every other place where gravity and quantum mechanics interact? What about the early universe? What about entangled systems that interact with curved spacetime? Is this just a corner case failure, or a sign that our entire framework for reality needs reconstruction? The black hole information paradox isn't just about astrophysics, it's about whether the universe makes sense. Because if information really can disappear, then causality, predictability, and even the concept of physical law may no longer apply. The lottery paradox. You buy a lottery ticket. You know the odds, 1 in 10 million. You believe reasonably that your ticket will lose. In fact, you believe every single ticket will lose. The odds for each one are microscopic. But you also know that one of them must win. Now ask, is it rational to believe of every ticket that it will lose, even though you know that not all of them can? This is the lottery paradox, introduced by philosopher Henry Keiberg in 1961. It reveals a deep conflict between three intuitions. It is rational to believe a highly probable statement. You should not believe a set of statements that you know are jointly inconsistent. You do in fact believe each ticket will lose, because that belief is justified. Together, these beliefs are incompatible. You're forced to abandon one, or accept that your reasoning is fractured. This isn't just about lotteries, it's about aggregated uncertainty. In everyday life, we believe highly probable things all the time, that your flight will arrive on schedule, that your hard drive won't crash today, that most published studies aren't fraudulent. Each belief is justified, but collectively, they can't all be true, and yet we behave as if they are. Some philosophers argue that we should stop treating high probability as enough for belief. Maybe credence, a continuous scale of confidence, is more appropriate than binary belief. Under this model, you don't believe each ticket will lose. You assign it 99.9999% probability. No contradiction. Others propose restrictions, only form beliefs about single events when their probability passes an extremely high threshold, or limit belief to coherent sets, avoiding any combination that creates conflict. But each fix makes belief harder to use, and real-world reasoning rarely follows such careful rules. The paradox also shows up in law. You might have overwhelming statistical evidence that a defendant committed a crime, say matching DNA in a database of millions. But if that's your only evidence, you might hesitate to convict, because even though the probability is high, you can't identify a narrative of guilt. In epistemology, this is called the problem of statistical evidence. You can believe each piece of evidence on its own, yet lack enough coherence to take action. The lottery paradox reveals something uncomfortable about rationality. That reasonable beliefs, when multiplied, can produce unreasonable systems, and when we build our lives on millions of tiny probabilities, the structure looks solid until we remember that some of them must be wrong. The Copenhagen Interpretation Dilemma. The Copenhagen interpretation is one of the oldest and most widely taught explanations of quantum mechanics. It states that a quantum system remains in a superposition, a blend of all possible states until it is measured. Only then does it collapse into a single definite outcome. This interpretation raises a dilemma. Does observation create reality, or does it merely reveal it? The classic thought experiment here is Schrödinger's cat. A cat is placed in a sealed box with a radioactive atom. If the atom decays, poison is released. If it doesn't, the cat lives. According to the Copenhagen view, until the box is opened, the cat is both alive and dead, a quantum superposition. Only when the observer checks does the wave function collapse. Only then is the cat one thing or the other. This sounds absurd, and yet it aligns with how quantum systems behave mathematically. The deeper dilemma is metaphysical. Is the act of observation a physical interaction that causes collapse, or is it consciousness that does the collapsing? Early physicists like Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg avoided metaphysical commitment. They treated the wave function as a tool for prediction, nothing more. But critics like Einstein were not satisfied. He famously said, "I like to think the moon is there, even if I am not looking at it." If particles don't have properties until observed, what does that say about the objective existence of reality? The Copenhagen interpretation is practical. It matches the math. It explains experiments, but it avoids the question, what is really happening? Other interpretations try to answer that. Many worlds theory says there is no collapse. Every outcome happens in a branching universe. Pilot wave theory reintroduces determinism and hidden variables. Objective collapse theories say wave function collapse happens spontaneously without observers. Each of these avoids the Copenhagen paradox, but each introduces its own problems. And none have been conclusively proven correct. Modern experiments like delayed choice quantum erasers and Bell tests have deepened the mystery. Particles seem to decide how to behave, based on whether or not they're observed, even retroactively. The mathematics is consistent, the predictions are accurate, but the ontological implications remain disturbing. The bystander effect thought experiment. A woman is stabbed in the street. She screams for help. Lights turn on in surrounding apartments. Windows open, then close. 38 people saw or heard something. No one intervened. She dies alone. This isn't fiction. It happened in 1964. Her name was Kitty Genovese, and it became the foundation for one of the most disturbing insights in social psychology, the bystander effect. The thought experiment is simple. Suppose a person collapses on a busy sidewalk. They need urgent help. You're nearby. So are 10 others. You hesitate. You assume someone else will help. You look for cues. You wait. So does everyone else. The more people who witness a crisis, the less likely any one of them is to act. Responsibility diffuses. Urgency fragments. Empathy evaporates. And a human being can die in full view of a silent crowd. The bystander effect has been replicated across countless experiments. In one study, smoke began pouring into a room. When subjects were alone, most got up to report it. When others were present but unreactive, almost no one moved. In another, a woman appeared to be assaulted behind a curtain. Subjects hearing only the struggle were more likely to intervene if they thought they were the only witness. As group size increases, individual action decreases. What we call morality is often just a function of proximity and isolation. This isn't just psychological, it's structural. Entire institutions rely on this failure. In corporations, abuse can continue for years because everyone thinks someone else is handling it. In governments, genocide proceeds while the world watches because action would require shared responsibility, and shared responsibility leads to no responsibility. In hospitals, errors go unreported. In schools, bullying escalates. In public spaces, people disappear into suffering, while crowds surround them. And the more people who witness the injustice, the easier it becomes to do nothing. There's something deeply unsettling here. Not that people fail to help, but that the presence of others makes them less human. Empathy becomes a collective illusion. Everyone is waiting for a hero, while everyone is pretending to be invisible. And the longer no one acts, the more normal the inaction feels. Eventually, silence becomes the signal for what's acceptable. The bystander effect reveals that evil doesn't always arrive with weapons or orders. Sometimes it enters quietly, through hesitation, through ambiguity, through the shared belief that someone else will fix it. And if enough people think that way, the result is not indifference. It's a system in which no one is guilty and everyone is complicit. Split brain experiments. Let's say you're holding a deck of cards. Someone flashes a word on the screen in front of you, just for a second. You didn't see anything, or at least you don't think you did. But then your left hand picks the card that matches the word. You didn't choose it. You didn't even know the word was there. But your hand, you. And when the scientist asks why you picked that card, you make something up. A story, a reason, something that sounds logical. But it's all a lie. Because the truth is, one half of your brain saw the word, and the other half just didn't know. Welcome to the world of split brain experiments. In the 1960s, neuroscientists studying epilepsy began surgically cutting the corpus callosum, the thick cable connecting the two hemispheres of the brain. The goal was to stop seizures. The result was a philosophical horror show. These patients could still walk, talk, laugh, and live normal lives. But under the surface, something had changed. They had become two people. Here's how it works. The left hemisphere controls language. The right hemisphere doesn't speak, but it understands visual input. So when scientists flashed a word to the right visual field, the left hemisphere saw it, and the person could say what they saw. But when the word was shown to the left visual field, seen by the right hemisphere, the subject couldn't say what it was. Instead, they'd pick up a pen with their left hand and draw it, a drawing. They couldn't explain. One side of their brain knew something. The other side didn't, but both sides still shared the same mouth, the same face, the same identity. It's like there were two people trapped inside one skull, and only one of them could talk. Let that sink in. There might be an entire part of your mind that sees things, understands things, makes decisions, but can't speak. And the part that can speak, it just makes up stories to explain what's happening. It invents reasons, justifications, beliefs, because the left hemisphere hates not knowing. It would rather lie to itself than admit it's confused. So, what does that say about consciousness? What if your sense of self is just the loudest narrator in your brain? What if there are thoughts, feelings, and intentions inside you right now that your consciousness can't access? And worse, what if they're acting without your permission? Now imagine someone with a split brain looking at a photo of their wife. The left brain smiles, remembers the wedding, but the right brain frowns, looks away. It doesn't like her. Two reactions, two minds, one face. Which one is the real person? And here's where it gets darker. If cutting the brain in half creates two minds, how unified were you to begin with? The Ship of Theseus. You have a favorite jacket. Maybe it's a bit old. The zipper's been replaced. One of the sleeves got restitched. A new button here. A patched hole there. Over time, bit by bit, you've repaired every part. Until one day, not a single original thread remains. Is it still your jacket? That's the Ship of Theseus. Imagine a ship, wooden, legendary. It belonged to the hero Theseus. As the years go by, its planks begin to rot. So the caretakers replace them, one by one, every board, every nail. Eventually, the entire ship has been reconstructed. But here's the question, is it still the same ship? Now take it further. What if someone gathered all the discarded planks, the original ones, and reassembled them into a second ship? Which one is the real Ship of Theseus? The new one, made of replacement parts, or the old one, made of the original pieces? Or neither. This isn't just about boats. It's about you. Your body replaces its cells constantly. Your skin, your bones, even your brain, renewed over time. You are not made of the same material you were 10 years ago. So, are you still you? Let's stretch it further. If I replaced your arms, your legs, your heart, your lungs, and even swapped your brain with an exact copy down to the neuron, would the resulting person still be you? Or would you have quietly vanished somewhere along the way, and now we're just pretending you're still here? You'd smile. You'd speak in the same voice. But would it really be you? Or just a really good imitation wearing your memories? We like to think identity is continuous. But maybe it's just a story we tell ourselves. A thread we refuse to see fraying. And here's the more disturbing side. What if someone else rebuilt your identity, piece by piece? Change your language, your culture, your values, rewire your beliefs, rewrite your childhood memories, alter your face. At what point do you stop being yourself? Where is the line where you end and something else begins? And worse, what if that transformation was subtle, slow, quiet, so slow you never noticed it? That's the horror of the Ship of Theseus. Not that you change, but that you don't realize you're not the original anymore. It also messes with morality. If a person commits a crime, but 20 years later they've become a different version of themselves, new cells, new thoughts, new remorse, are they still the same person who deserves punishment? Or did the original person quietly disappear, and we just didn't see it? And if that's true, then justice itself might be aimed at ghosts. This thought experiment has haunted philosophers for centuries. It forces us to ask, what holds identity together? Is it the material? The memories? The continuity of consciousness? Or is it just a name? A label we slap on a moving target to make ourselves feel whole? Because if you are the Ship of Theseus, then you're also a collection of replacements, familiar, but never permanent, recognizable, but never original. And somewhere inside, the real you may already be gone.
You just didn't notice.
The brain in a vat. You wake up one morning and pour yourself a cup of coffee. You take a sip. Warm, bitter, familiar. The mug feels heavy in your hand. The sunlight hits your face through the window. And for a moment, everything feels normal. But what if none of it is real? What if that cup, that sunlight, that entire kitchen doesn't actually exist? What if you are just a brain, floating in a jar, hooked up to electrodes, and everything you see, hear, feel, is just electrical signals carefully simulated by a machine? You think you're sipping coffee. You're not. You're twitching in fluid. This is the brain in a vat, one of the most disturbing thought experiments in philosophy. It asks a simple, terrifying question. How do you know anything is real? You might say, well, I can see it. But that's just your brain interpreting light signals. I can feel it. Still just nerve responses. Your brain doesn't need the outside world to produce experience. It just needs input. And if a machine, let's say a really good one, can replicate that input perfectly, then to you it's real. That coffee you tasted? Just a line of code. The people you love? Artificial emotional feedback. Your memories? Uploaded into the simulation. So you wouldn't ask too many questions. Let that sink in. Now you might laugh it off. You might say, come on, that's sci-fi stuff. The Matrix. But here's the problem. You can't prove you're not in a vat. Every test you could run, every sensory experience you could examine is filtered through the very thing being manipulated. Your brain, It's like trying to check if a dream is real while you're still dreaming. No matter how hard you try, you're stuck inside the illusion. The Denister cat, 17th century philosopher, had a version of this long before computers. He imagined an evil demon, deceiving you at every turn, feeding your mind with falsehoods, making you think 2 plus 2 is 4 when it might be 5, or worse, meaningless. His conclusion: the only thing you can be sure of is this: I think, therefore I am. You may not know what you are. You may not know where you are, but the very fact you're thinking means something exists. But here's the catch. Descartes didn't solve, what if the I that thinks isn't you? Let's say there's a guy. We'll call him Dave. Dave is hooked up to this simulation, and he thinks he's living a normal life. He has a job, a girlfriend, a dog that occasionally throws up on the carpet. He believes he has free will. He believes he remembers childhood, but he doesn't know he's in a tank. Here's the twist. Dave is you, and worse, the people running your simulation might not care about your comfort. Maybe this is all a test. Maybe it's a punishment. Maybe they're just watching you struggle, like ants under glass. Or maybe there's no one running it at all. Maybe the program's been running for so long that even its creators are dead, and you're just trapped here forever in an abandoned loop of meaningless stimulation. A ghost in an unplugged arcade machine. So what do you do with this thought? Nothing. That's what makes it unbearable. You can't fix it. You can't test it. You can't wake up. Because this might be the dream. You can only sit with the knowledge that everything you know might be fake, and the real world, if it even exists, might not have a place for you anymore. So enjoy your coffee. Whether it's real or not, it's all you've got. The Twin Earth Thought Experiment. Let's say you're drinking a bottle of water. Nothing fancy, just clear, cold, familiar. You set it down. You say that's water. Seems simple enough. But here's the twist. Imagine there's another planet. Exactly like Earth in every way. Same people, same cities, same brands, even the same conversations. We'll call it Twin Earth. You have a twin there. Looks like you, talks like you, drinks water, too. Except on Twin Earth, water isn't H2O, it's something else. Call it XYZ. Still clear, still wet, still drinkable, but chemically not the same. So here's the question. When your twin says water, what are they talking about? And when you say water, are you really saying the same thing? This is the Twin Earth Thought Experiment, created by philosopher Hilary Putnam in 1975. It challenges the idea that meaning lives inside your head, because you and your twin feel the same. You both grew up calling this stuff water. You both use the word the same way, but what you're referring to is different. Your water is H2O. Your twin's water is XYZ. So even though the thoughts feel identical, the meanings aren't. That's the horror of Twin Earth. It breaks the link between thought and truth. Let's go deeper. You might believe you know what pain is, or love, or truth. But what if the words you use don't mean what you think they mean? What if someone rewrote your environment, just slightly, swapped out the chemistry, changed the context, and you never noticed? You'd keep using the same language. You'd say, "That's my friend." You'd say, "I'm in pain." But what you're pointing to might be something entirely different. And you'd have no idea. Because language doesn't live in your brain. It lives between your brain and the world. Now imagine this. You wake up one day and everything looks the same. But it's not. Your coffee doesn't quite taste right. Your partner's voice sounds just a bit off. You go to the store, but the money feels fake in your hand. You try to explain it, but all the words still work. You still say coffee. You still say wife. You still say money. But none of it feels like it used to. And the scariest part? No one else notices, because maybe they're on their version of Earth. Or maybe you're not on your version anymore. Let's push it one step further. What if your whole life is built on mislabeling? What if the words you've used to describe your beliefs, your relationships, yourself, have never pointed to the same things other people mean? What if when you say "I love you," they hear something else? What if when you scream "help," it sounds like silence? Twin Earth isn't just about chemistry, it's about the terrifying possibility that even in perfect imitation, something is always off. And if meaning depends on the outside world, then losing touch with it means losing touch with yourself. You can say all the right words. You can speak fluently. You can sound perfectly sane. And still, no one will ever know what you actually meant, not even you. The zombie problem. You sit across from someone at dinner. They laugh at your joke, cut their steak, sip their wine. Everything looks right, except for one quiet, gnawing thought. What if they don't feel anything at all? This is the zombie problem, a famous thought experiment in the philosophy of mind. No, not Walking Dead zombies. These ones are clean, polite, fully functioning. They eat dinner. They drive cars. They say, "I love you." They do everything a conscious person does. But inside, there's nothing. No inner experience. No awareness. No qualia, the philosophical term for the raw feeling of being. The philosopher David Chalmers used this idea to pose a challenge. If a being can behave exactly like a conscious person without being conscious, then what is consciousness actually for? If it doesn't affect behavior, if it doesn't change the outcome, if it's just an invisible passenger, why does it exist? Why does your experience feel like anything at all? Pain doesn't just move your hand away from the stove. It hurts. Color doesn't just inform your brain. It glows. Sadness doesn't just make you cry. It aches in places you can't point to. A zombie would still flinch, still wipe tears, still say this is beautiful, but for them there's nothing it's like to be. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. How do you know you're not the zombie? You say you're conscious, you believe you have inner experience, but so would the zombie. You feel real because you can describe the feeling. But that's the trick. The zombie would say that too. So if behavior and language and memory can all be faked, then the only consciousness you can be sure of is your own. Everything else could be empty suits, well-coded puppets, and you'd never know. Let's push it further. What if your best friend is a zombie? They laugh at your jokes. They comfort you when you cry. They stay up late talking about life. But there's no one inside them, just reflexes, just programming. They say, "I'm scared," but they don't feel fear. They say, "I miss you," but they don't feel longing. They say, "I'm alive," but they're not. They're just playing the role of a human, and you believe them. Now imagine you're the only conscious being in the world. Everyone else? Zombies. They talk. They dream. They fall in love. But it's mechanical, and you're the only one who knows what it feels like to be. You're the only one awake in a room full of sleepwalkers. You reach out, hoping someone else will feel it too. But the responses come back. Perfect. Predictable. Empty. And then the real horror creeps in. What if they think you're the zombie? What if they're the only one with an inner world, and you're the echo? And neither of you can prove anything. Because consciousness doesn't leave a trace. It only leaves you wondering who's actually home. The problem of personal identity. Got it? You find an old photo of yourself 10 years ago. Different clothes, different haircut, different priorities. You stare at it for a minute and wonder, was that really me? You remember being there, but you don't feel like that person anymore. Not quite. So who are you now? And who was that? This is the problem of personal identity. The question of what makes you you. Not just today, but over time, across change, across memory, across damage. Because your body changes, your cells replace themselves. Your mind shifts with every experience. You've believed things you no longer believe. You've loved people you no longer speak to. You've done things you don't recognize yourself in, and yet somehow you call it all you. So what actually connects the person you were to the person hearing these words now? Some say it's memory. If you can remember being that past version of yourself, then the chain is intact. But memory is fragile. People misremember things all the time. We forget. We distort. We even invent. And if memory can be false, how do you know your story is real? What if your past is just a sketch your brain filled in with whatever felt right? then your identity is nothing more than a story, written by someone who might not even exist anymore. Others say it's the body, the brain, the physical structure. But that falls apart too. Your body isn't the same. Your brain's chemistry has changed. Neurons fire differently than they did 5 years ago. You are a ship rebuilt plank by plank, moment by moment. So what's left of the original? Where is the line where you end and a new version begins? Or is there no line at all? Now here's where it gets disturbing. Imagine you went into a coma today. 10 years pass. You wake up. No memory. Different thoughts. New personality. Are you still you? Or did the original vanish somewhere inside that silence? Maybe a new person woke up. Maybe a stranger is living in your body, pretending to carry your name. And if no one notices, if everyone accepts you as the same person, does it even matter? What if identity is just a social agreement? A placeholder we all pretend is solid, just to avoid the truth that we're constantly replacing ourselves. It gets worse. Imagine a perfect copy of you is created. Same memories, same voice, same scars. Then someone flips a coin. Heads, you die. Tails. The copy does. Would it matter to you? If the copy wakes up and feels like nothing happened, is that survival? Or did you still die? Would you feel safe, knowing your memories would go on without you? Or would it just be another mask walking around, fooling everyone, including itself? You started life as a baby. That baby had no memories, no beliefs, no language. But we say it was you. You'll end life one day as someone you don't recognize. And people will say it was you. Maybe you was never a person, just a shadow, stretched across time. Just a name we whisper to keep ourselves from falling apart. The utility monster. Imagine there's a creature, not a monster with fangs or claws, but something more dangerous. It feels pleasure, but not like you. Not like anyone. Give it one cookie and it experiences joy 1,000 times greater than you would. Give it 10 cookies and it practically explodes with happiness. It's wired that way. Every unit of pleasure you could possibly feel, it feels exponentially more. So here's the problem. According to utilitarianism, the moral theory that says we should always maximize total happiness, you should give the monster everything. Your food, your money, your time, your life. Because the joy it gets from using your resources far outweighs what you get from keeping them. This is the utility monster, created by philosopher Robert Nozick in 1974. It was meant as a critique, a challenge to pure utilitarian thinking. Because if we follow the logic, if all that matters is maximizing happiness, then fairness, equality, and even survival become negotiable. If the monster feels more than you, it deserves more than you. And if you suffer while it thrives, that's not injustice. That's math. It sounds absurd until you realize we do this already. We prioritize the most productive people, the highest performers, the top earners. We funnel resources to those who seem to generate the most value. And sometimes that comes at the cost of everyone else. If someone can create more, feel more, achieve more, we justify giving them more. But what if it never stops? What if there's always someone who extracts more pleasure from life than you do? Do you keep stepping aside? In sense, until there's nothing left for you. Nozick's monster isn't just a thought experiment. It's a mirror. It shows us what happens when we reduce morality to numbers. Because once you believe that happiness is all that matters, you start asking the wrong questions. You stop asking, is this fair? Is this sustainable? Does this honor human dignity? And you start asking, who feels the most? How do we feed them? Even if it means feeding them, you. Now let's get uncomfortable. What if the monster isn't a creature? What if it's your boss, or a government, or a machine, or a system designed to maximize engagement, consumption, stimulation? It extracts joy, likes, attention, money, far more efficiently than any individual. And we feed it, not because it's right, but because it works. Because it performs better than we do. Because we've convinced ourselves that outcomes are all that matter. And here's the most disturbing question. What if you're the monster? What if your pleasure comes at the cost of others' well-being? What if your comfort is built on someone else's exhaustion? Would you give it up, even if your loss meant their gain? Even if, by utilitarian standards, it was the right thing to do, or would you justify keeping what you have because you feel it more? And if you wouldn't give it up, why should anyone else? The Organ Harvest Dilemma. You're a doctor. You work at a quiet hospital. One healthy patient comes in for a routine checkup. He's fine. No complaints. Perfectly normal. In the next wing, 5 other patients are dying. One needs a heart. Another, a liver. 3 more need various combinations of kidneys and lungs. If they don't get transplants soon, they're gone. But there's a solution. You could take the healthy patient, put him under, harvest his organs, and save all 5. 1 death, 5 lives saved. Simple math. Would you do it? This is the Organ Harvest Dilemma, a chilling extension of utilitarian logic. It was originally framed by philosophers to test the moral consequences of maximizing outcomes at any cost. Because if you believe that the right thing is always the one that saves the most lives, then killing 1 innocent person to save 5 is not only acceptable, it's required. Most people recoil. Of course you don't kill the patient. That's murder. But now think about it from the 5 waiting beds. They're about to die. 1 person could save them all. And he wouldn't even know it's coming. He'd just fall asleep. Quietly. Wouldn't that be better than letting 5 suffer and die? And if we could guarantee the outcome, no risk, no error, does it make the act any more moral? Or just more efficient? This dilemma reveals something uncomfortable. That our moral instincts don't always align with our moral theories. Utilitarianism tells us to maximize happiness, minimize suffering. But what happens when doing the most good requires an act we feel is deeply wrong? Philosopher Bernard Williams warned about this in the 1970s. He argued that utilitarianism can strip away our humanity, turning people into numbers and intentions into equations. Because in this logic the individual disappears. The healthy patient isn't a person anymore. He's a resource, a walking inventory of spare parts. Now imagine this was a real policy. Doctors allowed to sacrifice 1 for 5. Hospitals incentivized to harvest. What would happen? People would stop going to checkups, stop trusting hospitals. Society would collapse into paranoia. Because we don't live by math alone. We live by trust. And that trust is built on knowing that you are not just a means to someone else's end. But we already do this. In subtler ways. Governments ration care. Insurance algorithms deny expensive treatments. People in power decide who gets help and who gets forgotten. You might not be on an operating table, but your name might already be missing from the list of those worth saving. So ask yourself, if you were in that bed, healthy and unaware, and the doctor walked in smiling, how would you want them to see you? As a person? Or as math?